Chapter 1. The NYPD boat lurched, and I almost slipped on the deck. The waves made a monotonous slapping sound against the boat's hull, like an uneven drumbeat as we cut through the choppy water. I sucked in a deep breath and could practically taste the Hudson River. The toxic odors of rotting fish and garbage didn't do anything to help the nausea I felt. I prayed it would pass. One of the officers assigned to the boat tapped me on the shoulder. He grinned and offered me a piece of beef jerky. "Very funny, asshole," Detective Terry Hernandez said as she snatched the jerky from the smirking cop and gave him a shove. "We're here to work. There's a woman's body out there." She turned to me. "You okay, Mike?" "Never better. Fresh air, the sea. Who could ask for more?" She smiled and said, "That's called karma for all the pranks you've played." Terry was trying to distract me. That's why I like working with her. I was on edge, terrified that I'd recognize the body we were on our way to recover. Suzanne Morton, a friend of my oldest daughter Juliana, had gone missing 3 weeks ago. The last place anyone saw her was at a prestigious acting class in Soho. Suzanne and my daughter had been in a few classes together in the past. The NYU sophomore kept a busy schedule but never missed an acting class. She had been a good influence around my house, encouraging my younger daughters to pursue their passions. I'd spent hours with Suzanne's parents. I had first met them 6 months ago when we attended a short play both the girls were in. Since Suzanne's disappearance, they'd asked me over and over again what the NYPD was doing to find their daughter. I understood. If your child is missing, you want the whole world to stop and go look for them. As a parent of 10 kids, I always seemed to have something to worry about. At least none of them was missing. I didn't need to use my imagination to worry about what might have happened to Suzanne. I'd seen enough as a homicide detective. It felt like a knife in my abdomen every time I pictured the young woman, her light brown hair framing a beautiful face that had deep dimples when she smiled. I felt a change in the engine, just as the pilot looked over her shoulder. She yelled in my direction, "Wind chop is really bad today. I'll get as close as I can." I looked out over the whitecaps and spotted a figure floating in the water. A second boat, a Zodiac inflatable hull outboard, discharged a diver. Recovery takes a lot of resources. We idled alongside the body. Now that we were closer, I could see more clearly that the body was a woman, floating face down in the water, with waves of long hair fanning out around her head. She was wearing a sparkly black cocktail dress that had attracted sea life. A fish nibbled at something in her hair. Terry stepped behind me. "Is it her?" Salt spray stung my face as I watched the grim procedure to recover the body. I shrugged. "Can't tell yet." I appreciated Terry's reassuring hand on my shoulder. The female crime scene tech on our boat pulled the winch line so the diver could attach it to the recovery basket. The wire basket was over 6 feet long, with sides tall enough to keep a person firmly inside. I was relieved to see the care they used. They didn't know about my possible connection to the victim. They were just professionals. Against all sound judgment, I stepped closer for a better look. The other crime scene tech, a doughy guy in his mid-30s, leaned over the edge of the boat. He'd been the first victim of the beef jerky prank. All it had taken was a quick whiff of the smelly, dried meat, and the tech had vomited over the side of the boat. But now, he showed great concentration and focus. Leaning so far out of the boat, his face almost touched the water. I heard a helicopter in the distance. When I looked up, I noticed it was a news helicopter. I hoped to God they didn't try to get too close and film the body coming onto the boat. I couldn't imagine a family ever seeing that on TV. But reporters continue to amaze me. I heard one of the crime scene techs say they were bringing the body on board. I took a deep breath and steadied myself. Chapter 2. I watched the crime scene technicians and police divers struggle in the choppy water. My stomach lurched as I stepped over to help. Forensic scientists and crime scene investigators can be territorial. The crime scene tech waved me off. Then, the male crime scene tech slipped during a particularly rough wave. He grabbed the basket holding the body. It tipped. I tensed, expecting disaster. The other tech sprang from the deck and managed to straighten the basket, at least temporarily. When the winch holding the basket swayed, the basket came forward onto the boat deck. That's when it happened. The body tumbled onto the deck of the patrol boat with a sickening thud. I kept my mouth shut. It was an accident, and conditions were dicey. It could have happened to anyone. One of the basket's black straps fluttered in the wind as both crime scene techs carefully picked up the body, turning her so that she faced up. We all stared at the victim for a moment as the female crime scene tech kneeled and meticulously brushed wet strands of hair away from the woman's face. It was not Juliana's friend, but whoever she was, this young woman had been stunning. Not just pretty or cute, but an honest-to-God beauty. Long, gorgeous dark hair, a straight petite nose, and high cheekbones. She hadn't been in the water long. She was fully clothed, and even still had her high heels strapped on. She looked like a peaceful angel lying on the deck of the boat. Terry Hernandez leaned in close to me. She said in a low voice, "This is really similar to a body we found in the Bronx about 2 months ago. Both pretty, both in formal wear, and both discarded like an old fast food container." She stepped past me and pointed at the body on the deck. "Looks like a puncture wound in the chest. It's small but noticeable." Terry turned and added, "See the red soles on those heels? This girl has really expensive taste. Those are Christian Louboutin stilettos, and the dress looks like a Gucci." I just nodded. I always need a few minutes after recovering a body. I tried to picture the circumstances that led to the victim's death. There was something about being dumped in the water that felt extra evil. It's one of my nightmares. I said a quick, silent prayer for this poor woman. At the moment, the only thing I could think of was catching whoever killed her. The crime scene techs took photo after photo from every angle. The male crime scene tech looked up from the body and said, "No ID of any kind. I'd put her age between 19 and 22. We'll try to get her fingerprints back at the lab. We'll see if she ever applied for a government job or has ever been arrested. But we might have a hard time figuring out who she is." I shook my head. Somebody's missing her. She'll match a missing persons report. We'll know in a day or two who she is. The thought of this girl dying alone caused a wave of sadness to pass over me. I'd promised myself that if these kinds of feelings didn't come to me whenever I saw a body, I'd know it was time to retire. Chapter 3. By noon, I was headed back to my office. Every time I walk through the doors of the Manhattan North Homicide Unit in an unmarked building on Broadway near 133rd Street, I am thrilled not to work anywhere near One Police Plaza. I was hoping there would be more information waiting for me at my desk. I also intended to track down our criminal intelligence analyst to help me sift through the data from my newest death investigation. I headed to the 7th floor where my squad took the center of the space with half a dozen small offices and interview rooms ringing it. I slid behind my desk and took a moment to make a few entries in my notebook and just think about what to do next. Even though we've moved on from physical case files to an electronic system called ECMS, Enterprise Case Management System, I still trust my own handwritten notes. Then I hustled to my boss's office. Harry Grissom's tall and lean frame fit well behind a desk, and I knew that sitting eased the discomfort he always felt. Harry favored his left side when he walked, the result of a knife wound that had severed his femoral artery when he was a young patrolman. He never complained, but it was clear from his gait that it was painful for him to walk too long. I realized Harry was starting to show his age lately. The creases around his eyes were now cracks. The mustache that drooped below his mouth, contrary to NYPD grooming policies, was now almost completely gray. Recently, I'd heard whispers that the big shots at One Police Plaza wanted Harry to retire. I hoped it wasn't true. Work was all Harry knew. I worried that without the NYPD, Harry, with 3 ex-wives and no kids, might become one of the many suicides in the police ranks. It's an issue no one inside or outside police agencies wants to talk about. The pressure of the job can be intense, but the pressure of losing the job can be overwhelming. Harry gave me a little wave and his version of a smile. "What do you got?" I filled him in on the recovery from this morning and told him about Terry Hernandez's mention of a similar victim. I'd like to work with Terry on this and look at both homicides together, just in case we're dealing with another serial killer. I don't want anything to put us behind the 8 ball. For a change, I wouldn't mind being a step ahead of an asshole like this. Harry gave me a nod. That meant to move full speed ahead. Other lieutenants might ask for memos or extra admin, but Harry's nod carried a lot of information. It told me to catch this killer any way I could. I almost ran from his office before things could be slowed down. I looked toward the criminal intelligence analyst's room as I left Harry's office and felt my first relief of the day. Sitting by himself in the corner of his office was Walter Jackson, arguably the best analyst in the NYPD. Without a doubt, Walter was the biggest analyst with the NYPD. He stood 6'6" and was every bit of 300 pounds. The word imposing didn't completely capture the 35-year-old African-American. The big man's smile tended to lift everyone's spirits. Walter had always been interested in helping his community, but he didn't like some of the risks associated with being a police officer. He found he had a knack for piecing together information and solving puzzles when he'd studied English literature at Virginia. So when he saw a job announcement for criminal intelligence analyst, he thought he'd give it a try. Now he was a legend in the department. I popped my head in the room. "Hey, Walter, I just caught a homicide and I've got a lot of information to put together. Any chance you're free? I got plenty to do, but it's tough to turn down a new homicide." "What do you need?" he asked. I stared at him. He didn't say anything. He returned my stare as he slowly smiled. "What is it?" "That's one of the first times you've ever answered a question without a pun." The big man laughed, his belly jiggling. "I bet my daughter Janine I could go a week without making a pun. I have to give her $1 every time I slip up, whether she hears it or not." "What made her want to bet?" I asked her, "When does a joke become a dad joke?" He paused, then added, "When the punchline becomes apparent." I guess most dads share a little bit of the same sense of humor, but I couldn't help but groan at that one. I didn't tell him I'd use that pun almost as soon as I got home. I gave Walter the recovery information I had and what I had learned from Terry Hernandez about her homicide in the Bronx. Walter didn't have to be told what needed to be done. He'd call the medical examiner's office to get the latest information, track down all the outside sources, like news stories on the other homicide. Then he'd give it to me in a concise manner. In short, it's people like Walter Jackson who make homicide detectives look efficient. Chapter 4. I'd been in the office less than an hour, searching the ranks of missing persons, hoping to find a match for the girl we had pulled out of the Hudson, when a shadow fell across my desk like an eclipse. I turned to see the towering figure of Walter Jackson. He eased down onto the hard wooden chair across from my desk. Walter never sat down with force. He'd learned better after a similar city-purchased chair had once crumpled under his weight. Now he instinctively tested each chair. He gently placed a photo on my desk. It was clearly a recent picture of the beautiful victim from this morning. It hurt my heart a little to see her smiling in the photo. I said, "That was fast. Me and Photomat promised to deliver photos in less than an hour." Jesus, Walter. Photomat? You're not that old. How do you even remember them? You're not much older than me, and you remember them." He looked at the photo. I got lucky. The ME's office picked up immediately. They have a fingerprint scanner connected directly to the FBI. Turns out the girl had once applied to work at a preschool in Soho. We were able to match her fingerprints to that application. Her name is Estella Abreu, nursing student at Pace. Lived in East Harlem with her family on 116th Street. He bent his head for a silent prayer. Walter did that any time he talked about a recent homicide victim, a common practice around people who deal with tragedy every day. Good work, Walter. Autopsy is scheduled for tonight. Aurora Jones is the assistant medical examiner on duty. I was glad to hear it. Aurora was a hell of a coroner. I nodded and looked at Walter. That's outstanding. Can you see if there's any connections between this victim and the one from the Bronx? When you have more information, we'll compare them. Walter didn't waste a second. The girl in the Bronx, Emma Schrade, was a student at Juilliard. There is one connection right there. Both were students. Emma was a soprano. He tossed an envelope onto my desk. I opened it to see a bright-eyed blonde with a spectacular smile. Where did these come from? I just pulled them off the internet. I printed them so you could take them on interviews. I saved the original photo in ECMS. Walter, just when I think you're out of surprises, you pull one more out of the hat. This is impressive for just a few minutes. I've got 2 daughters. You think I'm not motivated when I see a photo of a girl who's been murdered? I don't understand how you guys ever sleep at night. I'd be consumed with all the leads that come into a case like this. How do you handle it with your 10 kids? It's definitely a balancing act. Between sports, homework, and just trying to spend some time with them. This is a tough job. Walter shook his head. I don't know how you do it, Mike. With your crazy-ass cases and all those kids. How do you find time in the day? It's all about being efficient and keeping moving, like a shark. I'm afraid if I ever stand still, it'll kill me. Believe it or not, I also start coaching my daughter Fiona's basketball team this week. All school officials see when they look at me as a potential football coach, Walter said. No one can believe it when I tell them I've never even seen a football game all the way from beginning to end. He sighed. I don't know that I'd give up my steady daytime hours and comfortable desk for your job. I'd already be burned out and barely able to talk to my family. Walter, I know your family. It doesn't matter if you talk to them or not. They'd be talking to you. We both laughed, because we both understood what it meant to be true family men. I know what you mean. Questions at work, questions at home. Sometimes you want someone to answer your damn questions. I nodded. Elementary school math and science can baffle me. Walter paused. You mean like what weighs more? A gallon of water or a gallon of liquefied butane? They weigh the same, right? Walter grinned. No. Butane is lighter fluid. I groaned and said, You owe your daughter another $1. Totally worth it. Chapter 5. I studied the information Walter Jackson had come up with on both victims. It was during times like this, slouched at my desk, that I appreciated the padded chair I'd bought for myself. The city didn't care if hours at my desk hurt my back. As usual, Walter Jackson's packet on my homicide victim was outstanding. The right criminal intelligence analyst makes any case easier. Walter always sticks in little bits of information other analysts might ignore, putting in data on siblings and old addresses, giving investigators more options to pursue when starting out on a case. Sometimes, as a homicide detective, you've got to recreate the victim's world in your head. You've got to be able to live their life and see the world through their eyes, at least briefly. I was deep into Emma's and Estella's worlds and was startled when my phone rang. The kids had installed a new ringtone, the start of the piano solo from Eric Clapton's original Layla. As soon as I heard it, I remembered that my wife Mary Catherine was going to call me after her doctor's appointment. The first words out of my mouth were, How'd it go? Instead of a concise answer, I heard a series of shrieks and laughing in the background. Using my razor-sharp detective skills, I made an assessment and said, "You have the kids with you?" "Only 60% of them. We're on our way to buy some school clothes." "I thought you were going to call as soon as you were done at the doctor's office." "Things got crazy and I was running late." I heard my youngest child, Chrissy, whine that she wanted to talk to me. That started her sisters Fiona and Shauna doing the same thing. I could barely hear Mary Catherine as she tried to explain things in code. "Michael, I know I said I wanted to go to this first appointment on my own, but there was a lot to absorb. It was almost like She searched for another word. The cashier was trying to talk me out of any purchase. I was careful with my reply. I said, "To be clear, the doctor tried to talk you out of fertility treatment." "I have no idea why crime is rising with brilliant detectives like you running around." I snorted a laugh. I didn't want her to think I was trying to influence her one way or the other about her efforts to get pregnant. Finally, I came up with, "How do you feel about it?" "I really don't know. I think I'd like you to come next time." I knew her pause was a last-second change from, "I'd like you at the next doctor's appointment." All I said was, "Anything you want." I think about how great our life is now in a home filled with children. Mary Catherine paused to yell at the kids. "Everyone quiet for 2 minutes." I heard Trent sneak in and, "Or what?" The silence over the phone was terrifying. I knew those kids were facing the toughest of Irish glares. I felt sorry for them. She came back on the line and her voice betrayed no hint of anger. Mary Catherine said, "I look at it 2 different ways. I think how happy another—" There was a pause. "Visitor would be in our house. I also think we have the perfect balance now. No matter what, we can't lose. We have a great life and a baby would make it better." Mary Catherine said, "I thought irrepressible optimism was supposed to be my thing." We both laughed as she broke the tension. We chatted for a few moments about the rest of our day. Then I built up the nerve to tell her, "Listen, I caught a homicide earlier today. I'll probably be home late." A homicide detective's spouse hears this phrase dozens of times a year, but it felt harder to say knowing she was having a rough day. There was silence for a few moments on the other end of the line. Then Mary Catherine haltingly asked, "I know you've been looking for Juliana's missing friend Suzanne." No, it wasn't Suzanne. Suzanne's father left another message for me this morning. I've been over to missing persons at one police plaza several times, hoping to find out something. So far, there's nothing on her. But Suzanne wasn't the girl we fished out of the Hudson. Oh, my Lord. Someone dumped a body in the river? That's horrible. I try not to bring home the terrible things I see on my job. I guess I've achieved my goal because Mary Catherine was still reeling from the few details I had told her. I never want my family to become numb to the horrors that happen. Just like I don't want to lose sight of what each homicide means, especially when the victim is young. Somewhere a family had lost a child. Every homicide victim means potential that won't be reached. I know in my heart someone feels the loss every time a person is murdered. Mary Catherine said, "Don't worry about a thing, Michael. I have a plan for the afternoon that includes helping the twins with a project, then showing Ricky how I make my Irish stew." Her kind understanding, especially when she said things with that light Irish accent, made me want to rush home that much faster. Chapter 6. Terry Hernandez met me in East Harlem near where Estella Abreu, the young woman we'd pulled out of the Hudson, had lived. I caught Terry up on everything I'd learned about our victim. The only address listed for her is this one with her parents on 116th Street. A patrol sergeant made notification almost as soon as we knew who she was. We were about to do one of the most challenging things all homicide detectives do. Interview the family of a homicide victim. You never know what you're going to find. A family in denial? A family grieving so deeply they can't focus? A family so shattered by the loss of the child, they don't know how to cope. There's a wide array of responses to losing a family member to homicide, and none of them are positive. You know, I did some work not too far from here. Did a year in narcotics that, for a time, had me coordinating with officers at the 2-3, Terry said. Is the neighborhood better or worse than back then? Same. Still tough. Right over there is where a convenience store robber shot at me. What happened to the shooter? He ran and ended up shooting a cab driver. Then he took the cab and went on a high-speed chase. The New Rochelle cops finally got him with stop sticks. He was booked. But since he didn't hit me, and the cab driver survived, he got time served and 2 years probation. I said, if the shooter had hit you, the judge would have given him another month or two for sure. I don't think people realize how close most cops are to just stepping away. I hear ya. All we can do in the meantime is our best. Maybe if we did a better job, this neighborhood wouldn't be so rough. Terry pointed down the street. Over where those guys are selling dope was the site of my biggest fistfight. Place looks about the same. For a girl to get out of here and go to nursing school is really something. Her parents have to be special. She shook her head and added, and this is their reward? Makes you wonder why we all try so hard. Shit happens no matter what. All I could do was nod. I'd been thinking about this most of the afternoon. This beautiful young woman studying to be a nurse at Pace University, and suddenly everything was taken from her. It made me sad, but it also made me angry. Chapter 7. We paused outside the building, a 5-story apartment complex a few blocks from the East River. It was quiet on the street this time in the early evening. A few people were coming home from work. There were no kids playing outside. That said all that needed to be said about the neighborhood. A man standing by the steps saw us pull up and immediately called someone to let them know the cops were here. Terry said, "Relax. We're not here for you or any of your petty crimes." The man looked insulted and relieved at the same time. We climbed up 2 flights of stairs to the Abreu family's 3-bedroom apartment. As we walked, Terry asked, "Any indication why Estella was so dressed up? Or where she was going? Some kind of university function?" "No, nothing like that. Still checking." I took a deep breath to prepare myself for what we were about to do. The apartment door was open, and we could hear people talking inside. I knocked lightly, hoping someone would notice me at the open door. I'd seen scenes like this play out too many times. Still, there was something positive in seeing people here, comforting grieving parents. I spotted a couple I assumed to be the Abreus together on a small love seat. A short, pudgy man wearing a work shirt with the name Raoul stenciled across his left breast, sitting with his arm around a small woman dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. She had the same long dark hair as Estella, and I could see a strong resemblance. One wall looked like a shrine to Estella, with photos from her first communion and soccer trophies all set up on a library table in the corner of the room. An elderly woman who I thought might be Estella's grandmother silently arranged more photos on the table. A young man came to the open door and said, "May I help you?" I leaned in close and told him who we were and why we were here. He appreciated the quiet introduction. He motioned us inside, then said to the couple on the love seat, "Tio, I think you need to talk to these people." A few minutes later, we were in a bedroom with Mr. and Mrs. Abreu, sitting on a bed covered by a thick, vibrantly colored comforter printed with birds nesting in trees. We'd waited for Mrs. Abreu to compose herself in the bathroom. It looked like she could have used a couple more minutes. We started slowly. Grieving parents don't usually come up with the details that can really help in an investigation right away. We chatted about their daughter's life. That is always the best route to information. Mrs. Abreu spoke with a thick Spanish accent. "My Estella was not just pretty, she was beautiful. Since the day she came into this world, smart as a whip, too. She was also nearsighted, and she started wearing glasses at 6. She always chose stylish frames, but she tried not to wear them for pictures. Without them, she was almost blind. She could wear contacts for a short while. Mr. Abreu kept nodding. Estella is sweet, too. He froze, then eked out, I mean, she was. Then he started to cry. We went back to short questions about friends, interests, and relationships. After a few minutes of simple questions, Terry Hernandez asked Mrs. Abreu, Do you have any idea where Estella was going last night? She was dressed up like she was going out on the town. The grieving woman shook her head. After blowing her nose into the handkerchief, she looked up and said, When Estella went out yesterday evening, she was dressed in casual clothes. I don't know anything about being dressed up. Terry politely asked if she could see Estella's bedroom and closet. I followed along as Mrs. Abreu led us to the third bedroom. All eyes followed us as we walked through the crowded living room. There was no question who we were or why we were here. These people expected results. I watched silently as Mrs. Abreu showed Terry Hernandez her daughter's room and closet. After rooting around for a minute, Terry pulled a shopping bag out of the closet. She looked to Mrs. Abreu for approval. The middle-aged woman nodded, and Terry opened the bag. Inside was another bag, which held a long, flowing designer gown. She stood up and held the dress almost to her chin, so it just barely cleared the floor. It was a dark green, and looked like what someone would wear on a red carpet at the Oscars. It would make anyone look elegant, especially someone like Estella. Terry said, When did Estella wear this? Mrs. Abreu took a tentative step forward. She reached out and felt the material between her thumb and forefinger. She focused on the dress for several seconds, then turned to Terry. I have never seen these. Terry took some photos of the dress, then carefully folded it and put it back in the bag. She left it in the corner of the closet. Estella's mother had a vacant stare. It was like we weren't even in the room with her. Without hesitation, Terry wrapped her arms around Mrs. Abreu. The woman started to sob. We stood in silence for minutes while Mrs. Abreu let out the emotion of the worst day she was ever going to have. Terry continued to hug her. When Mrs. Abreu recovered, we headed back into the main room where her family had gathered. Everyone looked at us to make an announcement. Instead, I awkwardly eased toward the front door. Mr. Abreu acted as my escort as people parted to let us exit. I left my card and told them we might have more questions, and let them know it was okay to call me any time. Mr. Abreu stepped out, grabbed my arm. He said in a low, shaky voice, Tell me, detective, who could do something like this to a beautiful girl like Estella? I don't know, sir, but you can bet I'll do my best to find out. Chapter 8. It had been a long day, and I was still going. I threw down 2 Butterfinger Minis just to give me some energy. The quart of coffee I'd downed since mid-afternoon sloshed around in my belly as I pulled my city-issued Chevy into an official parking spot in front of the NYC Health Department building on the corner of 1st Avenue and 30th Street, a block from the East River. This was one of 3 forensic pathology centers run by the New York City Medical Examiner. The other 2 were in Queens and Brooklyn. No one is ever happy to go to the medical examiner's office, but we'd caught a break. The assistant medical examiner on duty, Aurora Jones, could turn around a long, shitty day. With her charming Jamaican accent and sparkling smile, Aurora always lifted spirits, especially if people were looking tired or depressed. Maybe it was her job. Maybe she was around those kinds of people too often. Whatever the reason, I was looking forward to seeing her. I met Aurora at her office on the 3rd floor. I always smiled at her sense of humor, like how she decorated the cluttered cave with posters of Night of the Living Dead and The Walking Dead, opposite one for Shaun of the Dead. At just over 5 feet tall, she sprang from her chair and hugged me. It felt like I was hugging one of my kids. Aurora stepped back. You look like shit, Bennett. Wish I didn't feel like it, too. She poured a cup of the harsh Dominican coffee she liked. It felt a little like drinking Drano with some coffee flavor, but it revived me, at least for a moment. As we walked down the hall at Aurora's blistering pace, I said, "Terry Hernandez said she'd wait for us at the examination room." Aurora let out a quick laugh. "She's probably looking for Jeff Alter. He's a tech. If I was 15 years younger, I'd hang out near there too." I never thought about Terry's dating life. Maybe because we got along like old buddies. As Aurora and I continued our fast trot downstairs, we caught up with each other about our families, especially her son, who was in his second year at UMass. He was a backup player on their basketball team, but still earned a full scholarship. I said, "I'm going to need more than a few scholarships to get all my kids through college." "Maybe you'll get lucky, and only a few of them will get into college," she cackled. "I can't keep up with their homework now. The twins' math is almost incomprehensible to me. I remember when I was in school, I once asked my teacher, Sister Sheila, when I would ever need to really use algebra. What was her answer? She said you won't, but some of the smarter kids will. That one little insult pushed me to study and get an A in algebra. I think Sister Sheila is still proud of that little quip. I see it in her smile every time she greets me. If I didn't know you better, I'd say that sounds like a massive inferiority complex." We got to the hallway with the examination rooms. I saw Terry playing with her hair as she gazed up at a tall young man. But as soon as she saw us, she straightened up and led us into the room where the autopsy would be performed. I'd been dreading this moment. As a professional homicide detective, I've seen my share of autopsies. These rooms and their equipment are not made for comfort. As Aurora once said, "When a patient complains about the uncomfortable tables, I'll change them." I try not to think of the victims while a medical examiner slices open different parts of their bodies and pulls out their organs. I view it mainly as an exercise in gathering evidence. This case felt a little different. I'd met Estella Abreu's family. I'd seen photos of the beautiful girl who reminded me of my own daughters. Aurora set up her recorder, and Jeff, the tall forensic tech, started taking photos. I could hear Aurora speaking into her recorder, and the occasional grunt or mumble as she looked at every aspect of the body. Instead of walking right up to the table, I hung back and averted my gaze. I knew there was an unclothed body stretched out on the steel table. It almost felt like an invasion of privacy, looking at a naked woman without her permission. It didn't matter if she was dead or alive. That's just how I felt at the moment. Instead, I went through paperwork to make sure that Estella's dress and shoes had been saved as evidence. The chances of finding anything on the dress were remote. The salt water in this part of the Hudson River does a good job of washing away DNA, but you never know. A little over an hour after she started, Aurora, Terry, and I huddled at a desk on the far side of the examination room. Aurora's scrubs had a few stains on them from her recent work. It didn't seem to bother her. She said, "I understand. You're wondering if the victim from the Bronx homicide might be related to this. We're interested in any similarities." "I reviewed the case notes on that one after you called. As far as a physical examination and mode of death, there's no similarity. Emma Schrade, the victim from the Bronx, died from strangulation. This girl died from a puncture wound directly beside the sternum and between her 4th and 5th ribs. It left only a small hole in the dress." "How big was the knife?" "I don't think it was a knife. It was cylindrical, relatively long, almost like—" She paused as she searched for the right word. "A round metal rod, maybe a kitchen tool. The victim in the Bronx wasn't stabbed." Aurora continued. "Whoever stabbed this girl was powerful. They struck her with such force that it damaged the cartilage in her chest. The weapon was long enough to skewer her heart. The blow probably stunned her so badly that she bled out before she even knew what happened. Emma Schrade was strangled by a similarly powerful assailant. Parts of her windpipe were crushed. That indicates a killer who has strong hands and who apparently doesn't stop once they start." That last statement sent a chill down my back. It was exactly what I was afraid of. Chapter 9. I was happy to be headed home after a day like this. It wasn't even that late. The kids would still be awake. That's what I needed about now. Kids. I parked my city-issued Chevy Impala in the garage across the street from my apartment building on the Upper West Side. I had to take a moment to breathe and center myself. I know that sounds a little like a hippie in the Rockies, but I didn't want to bring home the tragedy of a day like this to my family. The fact that I was so exhausted would make it worse. I gulped some air and took a swig from a 20-ounce Coke I'd bought after leaving the medical examiner's office. I cherish any time with my family. I have to. It's the same story with almost every cop. Few of us can count the number of holidays and family gatherings we've missed. Being with my kids would ease the heartbreaking experience of seeing a beautiful young woman on a medical examiner's slab. As soon as I opened the door and heard feet running towards me, my mood soared. Somehow I caught Shauna in midair as she leapt up to give me a hug. I'm pretty sure the younger girls will give up their practice of jumping at me like a missile before I get too old and frail to deal with it. I'm not about to tell anyone to stop it. How many people have someone who loves them so much they jump into the air to greet them? After I made it into the living room, delivering hugs and kisses along the way, Fiona bounded up to me wearing basketball shorts and a Holy Name jersey. "I'm ready to play as soon as we start practice." I grinned. She was so excited she was talking as fast as an auctioneer. Enthusiasm could be contagious. I liked seeing it in my middle schooler. Fiona continued in that rapid-fire style. "I've been practicing in gym class every day. Sister Elizabeth says I have a good jumper and sense of the court. She says since I'm tall, I would be a good center, but I did some research, and if I want to go to college on a scholarship, I have a better chance as a point guard." I held up a hand. "Hold on there, Steph Curry. Let's play our best and see where it takes us." She nodded like she was electrified. "Good plan. Are you as excited as I am?" I don't like to lie to my kids, so I just smiled and said, "I will do my best to be a good coach." The twins, Fiona and Bridget, looked alike in the face. Maybe in their mannerisms. That's where the similarities stopped. Bridget was reserved and preferred quiet activities. Fiona gravitated to anything she was good at, sports or academics. If she had a talent, Fiona used it. She had played basketball with the boys over the summer and never complained about them being rough. She really was tall. Maybe she had some talent that could be developed. I just hoped I was qualified for the task. Chapter 10. I spent a few minutes with Mary Catherine in the kitchen, away from the kids, wolfing down a few bites of leftover Irish stew from their dinner earlier that evening, but also checking to make sure she was doing okay. She said, "I'm fine, really. I worry about you while you're working. I'm a little tired. You know, the usual." I kissed her and listened to an abbreviated account of the day. I was constantly amazed by this beautiful woman. She managed to guide all 10 kids through most days with barely a hitch. Mary Catherine said, "Ricky and Eddie did have a problem. You should go talk to them." I held my questions. As Mary Catherine told some of the younger girls to get ready for bed, I stepped into the living room and got a good look at the boys. I froze. Ricky had a black eye, and Eddie had a cut lip. I knew brothers tended the roughhouse, but these two had never been the least bit aggressive. The injuries were from someone else. Like any father, I could already feel my blood pressure starting to rise. Who would lay a hand on my kids? "What happened?" I almost shouted. Eddie said, "Some boys punched Ricky, so I jumped into the fight." This sounded improbable. I turned a flat stare at Ricky. He blurted out, "It wasn't really a fight, Dad. They just came up and punched us both out of nowhere. They both looked a little older than us." We didn't recognize them. "Where exactly were you?" Eddie said, "Sometimes we like to shoot hoops across from the school and down the block a little bit. Not as many rules there. Feels like we're doing something dangerous." Ricky interrupted him. "But it's not dangerous. It just feels dangerous." He looked directly at Mary Catherine and said, "We're both very careful all the time." I said, "Yes, we know you're the most conscientious young men in the city. I don't care that you were playing basketball off campus. You should be allowed to walk around the Upper West Side without being accosted. I got a few more details. The bullies hadn't demanded anything or stolen anything. Mary Catherine looked at the boys seriously and said, "I don't want you getting in fights." Ricky said, "I don't want to get in fights either." I tried to hide my smile as Mary Catherine and I said they should at least try to reason with boys like that. It was nice to be on exactly the same wavelength. But it didn't last long. Mary Catherine said, "And if reasoning doesn't work, run away. Find your great-grandfather or one of the nuns." Before I knew what I was saying, I held up my hands. Sometimes you need to get a good lick in yourself. Bullies don't like it when people fight back. You may not win the fight, but you might discourage them. Mary Catherine said, "Are you sure that's the right thing to do?" "No. This is one of the situations when you use your experience. I don't want to see these boys become doormats who are afraid to engage with anyone." I could tell by the look on Mary Catherine's face how strongly she disagreed with me. I was sure we'd have a discussion about it later. My American mentality versus her Irish mentality. Or perhaps it was much more of a mother's mentality versus a father's mentality. I didn't want to see anyone bother my boys, but I did want them to stand up for themselves. I decided to talk to my grandfather about it as soon as I could. Chapter 11. The next day I picked up Terry Hernandez in front of the 4-6 on Ryer Avenue in the Bronx, where she'd been catching up with one of her friends at the precinct. We scooted north on the Bronx River Parkway until we were on the edge of Scarsdale, New York. Terry said, "I hate leaving the city for the snobby people in Scarsdale." "Come on. How many people from Scarsdale have you ever even met?" "A few, and I feel bad for this grieving family. I don't count them as snobs. I just don't like the vibe. Too many white people clustered together makes a girl like me nervous." Westchester County sat just a little north of the city, but the atmosphere and attitude were entirely different. I gawked at the impressive houses as we cut through Scarsdale to the home of Lisa and Robert Schrade, parents of Emma Schrade, the young woman found strangled in the Bronx 2 months ago. Terry had been working the homicide. The house where the Schrades lived sat at the end of a cul-de-sac on a hill. The second story was nestled in a cluster of elm trees. The yard was perfectly manicured. The circular driveway had a Cadillac SRX and a Chevy Volt, with the spare donut tire on the front driver's side. I said, "You know the difference between a dead-end street and a cul-de-sac?" Terry gave me a look. She knew me, so she tentatively prompted, "No. What's the difference between a dead-end street and a cul-de-sac?" "About $100,000. Terry let out a laugh. She said, "That's clever. Did you just now come up with that?" "I wish. I read it in a Mad magazine ages ago, and I've been waiting to use it ever since." Terry let out a whistle as we stepped out of the car. She said, "I've been here 3 times. Each time it feels like this place is bigger." "It's a relative shack compared to the neighbors." "You telling me you couldn't raise your 10 kids here?" "I could raise my kids anywhere. But you're right. They'd have fun up here. If you know anyone who wants to give me a house, I'll consider it." Terry knew our apartment had been inherited by my first wife. She even knew about the trust in place to pay the taxes on our Upper West Side apartment. The chances of getting a deal like that, twice in a lifetime, seemed pretty slim. We stood on the front porch for a moment as I checked a few notes. Someone inside the house was playing the piano. They were good. Just as Terry was about to push the doorbell, the door swung wide. A woman wearing a light blue blouse and dress slacks with running shoes said hello to Terry, who in turn introduced Dr. Lisa Schrade to me. She said to Terry, "I'm on shift in about an hour. This shouldn't take too long." "Is your husband home as well?" Terry asked. "Let me see. Middle of the week? Middle of the morning?" "Of course Robert's here," Dr. Schrade said over her shoulder as she led us down a long tiled entryway. Each tile had a hand-drawn image of nature. There were birds, deer, and some of the tiles were just trees. "Who's playing the piano?" I asked. "It's lovely." Dr. Schrade said, "That's our younger daughter, Lauren. She hopes to get into Juilliard just like her sister." She added, Emma was the first student from her school to get into Juilliard in more than 10 years. She had an excellent GPA and had very high SATs. Clearly, Dr. Schrade was proud of her daughter's accomplishments. I realized this was how I must sound talking about my kids. With 10, I had a lot of choices of what to brag about, but Juilliard was a huge accomplishment. My stomach fluttered at the thought of one of the younger kids wanting to attend Juilliard. I wasn't certain, but I guessed my entire annual salary might barely cover tuition. At the end of the entryway was a small music room to one side. A girl of about 16 with long, light hair didn't look up from her practice. We followed Dr. Schrade to a pleasant patio at the rear of the house. Ferns spilling over narrow planters gave the patio a wilderness vibe. Robert Schrade sat at a small round table sipping a glass of iced tea. Dr. Schrade's husband was almost the complete opposite of her. Long hair drooped over the collar of his stained polo shirt. Streaks of gray shot through his shaggy beard. I remembered reading that he was some sort of part-time acting coach in the city. I guess it was Dr. Schrade's salary that paid for this nice house and the tuition at Juilliard. We all sat around the glass-topped patio table with a pitcher of iced tea. Terry got right to our questions as soon as both of the Schrades were sitting comfortably. The family may have been coping with the death of their older daughter, but there were obvious strains in the marriage. I didn't know what Mr. Schrade had been like before his daughter was murdered, but he seemed lost now, while Dr. Schrade clearly forced herself not to roll her eyes every time her husband spoke. After all these years of talking to the families of homicide victims, I understood their pain. The homicide may have occurred 2 months ago, but it was still an open wound for these poor parents. My quick assessment of the emotional state of the Schrades was that Dr. Schrade seemed like she was using work to occupy herself. Her husband was a different story. He shambled along and didn't add much to our interview. He would be the one to worry about. Mr. Schrade looked like he'd been knocked for a real loop. We went over some of the earlier questions Terry had been asking. The parents had paid Emma's bills, and she had earned a little extra money singing at weddings and other events. Throughout the interview, I listened to the haunting piano music from inside the house. I glanced over at a table with some photos of the sisters. I picked up the first one. Mr. Schrade said, "I was just going through a few old photos. That was Emma when she was about 14. Dr. Schrade said, "You can see she had pretty bad acne back then. We finally got it under control, but she had a few scars. I would tell her she wore too much makeup as she got older, but I realized she was just trying to cover her old scars. That acne really bothered her. Funny what affects each of us the most." Her words trailed off as she thought about her daughter. Mr. Schrade added, "You've seen the more recent pictures of her. She really blossomed once she got to Juilliard. She was a striking girl, and no one ever noticed a few blemishes." Terry tactfully said, "I know we've talked about this, but now that you've had time to think about it, did Emma ever mention a boyfriend or relationships?" Both of her parents shook their heads in unison. Dr. Schrade said, "I know she was dating and going out on occasion, but we never talked about any specific boys. Emma liked her independence and privacy. She was very careful never to post anything personal on social media." As we walked back into the house, and they stopped for a moment so Terry could take down a new phone number, I glanced into the music room just as Emma's sister took a break. I decided to take a chance. Chapter 12. I stepped into the piano room, which had dark mahogany paneling and a high ceiling. I wondered if it had been designed for acoustics. I could hear Terry still talking with the Schrades in the foyer. I approached the girl at the piano and smiled. I said, "I wish I could say I knew what you were playing, but it was beautiful." Lauren returned my smile. She looked like her sister. I noticed a few wisps of acne on her cheeks. "I only know classical music from watching Bugs Bunny or hearing commercials for classical music on TV," I told her. "Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata is one of the few classical songs I can identify." Without saying a word or missing a beat, the teenager played the first few bars of the Moonlight Sonata. It was like she was a different person as she focused for a few moments. Ah, just like the commercial, only the sound really carries in here. The girl spoke for the first time. My parents spent a fortune to build this room just right for my sister's singing. They didn't want it to go to waste. So now I'm supposed to practice and hear hours a day. I said, "Your name's Lauren, right?" The pretty girl nodded. "Do you want to go to Juilliard like your sister?" Lauren shrugged. "My parents definitely want me to, just like they forced Emma to go. Wasn't it your sister's dream to go to Juilliard?" Lauren took a moment. She appeared to be a serious young woman. Emma wanted to be a star. She'd have preferred going on American Idol or The Voice. She only went to Juilliard because our parents insisted, like they're doing with me. What would you like to do? I don't know. I'm not sure what I want to do yet. I let out another smile. She sounded just like some of my kids. That's the right answer. Worry about what you're going to do with your life when you get a little older. Lauren turned in her seat to look at me directly. You're trying to find who killed Emma, aren't you? This wasn't a random question. I paused, nodded, and said, Detective Hernandez and I are working on it. Lauren said, This whole thing sucks. Emma could be bossy and even a little mean, but she was a pretty good sister. I miss her. Were you guys close? There were 4 years between us, but we bonded together against my parents. It was kind of fun. Did Emma ever talk to you about boyfriends or dating? No. Emma didn't confide in people. She liked doing her own thing, not answering questions about it. She had a few fights with our parents about being careful in the city and checking in at least once a day. She didn't like that at all. Do you think she had a wild personal life? I doubt it, Lauren scoffed. Emma was pretty focused. My parents paid for her apartment and food, but didn't give her much for fun. That annoyed her. And she complained that the city was so expensive. She also told Dad he couldn't crash at her place after his acting classes on Tuesday and Thursday nights. She just wanted her independence. But I think it hurt his feelings. Emma's sister had given me some insights. But that wasn't why I'd wandered into the music room. I said, How are you doing through this whole thing? She shrugged again. It made me wonder if all teenagers were trained to shrug in exactly the same way. She said, I guess I'm doing okay. My parents aren't quite right, especially my dad. He never missed one of Emma's school concerts. I wanted to leave this girl on a positive note. I said, Can you play me something I wouldn't expect? Like what? I don't know. I wouldn't expect it. A smile slipped across her face. She turned back to the piano and started playing a haunting melody that wasn't quite classical music. The deep chords resonated inside the room. I could feel the performance suck me in. It was phenomenal. She wrapped up the song after about 2 minutes. She looked at me and said, That was Solace by Scott Joplin. But I played a version that was arranged by Marvin Hamlish. I almost couldn't speak. I felt like this young woman had opened a new musical door for me. I heard Terry finishing up with Dr. Schrade. I waved to Lauren. She gave me a genuine smile. Chapter 13. After I drove Terry back to her car, I decided to pay a visit to an informant who'd helped me break some of the biggest cases of my career. It was a little high maintenance to use too often, not so bad that I had to pull all the green M&Ms out of a bowl. More like having to deal with an unending stream of minor bullshit, such as his asking to get out of parking tickets or hoping I'd arrest one of his rivals. I had to balance the value of his information against the cost. About 6 years ago, he'd legally changed his name from Ronald Higdon to Ronald Higdon Esquire. He spelled out the Esquire. It wasn't illegal, unless he was caught claiming to be an attorney or acting as someone's attorney. Anyone who knew him recognized it was just another scam. About the time he changed his name, He also helped me make an arrest in a nasty drug homicide on the Upper West Side. 2 bodies in an alley with no ID. The homicide investigation was stalled. After a day of stumbling around with no progress, I called Ronald. He came up with the victims' names in less than 2 hours. The next day, he had the shooter's name for me. In return, he asked to have his criminal record erased. That didn't happen. That couldn't happen. So he'd settled for getting off probation early. Believe me, it was a good trade. Ronald ran his uncle's pawn shop on West 127th Street, a couple of blocks from the famous Apollo Theater. Higdon's Pawn and Jewelry had been in the same spot nearly 16 years. I was certain that Ronald fenced stolen property through the pawn shop, but it was more of a gut feeling than real information. And frankly, for the kind of help he'd given me in the past, I was prepared to overlook the assumption. I knocked on the shop's front door and waited for Ronald to buzz me in. The place was roomy for a New York pawn shop. Clean, but not fancy. The concrete floor was painted with thick gray paint. The shelves holding assorted electronics and collectibles didn't match. The shop didn't have nearly as much inventory as other pawn shops I'd seen, which reinforced my belief that Ronald was using the place for things other than short-term loans on people's personal belongings. The lean man behind the counter gave me a smile. A gold tooth twinkled in the light. He was about my age and had seen some tough times. I've never asked him about the scars on his face or the bullet wound on his wrist. That is sort of the way a relationship with an informant works. You don't get to know them too well, and don't ask too many questions. Ronald came from behind the counter and shook my hand. He wasn't quite as tall as my 6 feet 3 inches, maybe 6'1", but he was sturdy, and he had a strong grip. What brings the city's best homicide detective to my humble shop today? I smiled. He used a good narrator's voice with precise enunciation. There weren't many informants with a delivery like that and a college education to back it up. Ronald had bragged about how he worked hard at having no discernible accent. I knew it had more to do with tricking people on the phone than any sort of interest in self-improvement. I gave him a rough overview of the 2 homicide victims. I was careful not to give him any details he might use for other reasons. You never want an informant to create a suspect from the facts provided. He even made a few notes as he nodded. I'll start making calls right away. I got more and more people around the city. What are you interested in me asking about? Anything unusual? Anyone who might hang with a younger crowd? Or if we're lucky, someone's talking. Maybe a street person saw something. You know the drill. Anything that might help. This isn't my usual kind of thing. I don't mix with a crowd that talks much about college girls. But I'll see what I can do. And what will your help cost the city or me? The way the smile slid over his face, I knew he had an answer ready. Ronald said, I'm in a little bit of a bind. There's a lady down in Soho who claims I told her I was an attorney. She said she listened to my advice on a minor civil matter. Now she's being sued for $2 million and is blaming me. A Detective Matthews in the 1st Precinct says what I did is criminal, and he's not done with me. Could you have a talk with the good detective? Let's see if you make any progress first. I was about to tell him I'd make a phone call to the detective to see where he was on the case. Instead, I was startled by someone rattling the door violently. I heard Ronald mumble, "Goddamn, not now." He hit the buzzer to avoid his door being shattered. 3 young, buff men rushed into the pawn shop. One of them said, "You owe us $2,000 for those little metal people." The Brooklyn accent, the dark hair, and the tattoos on his arm all told me this was probably an Italian kid raised in Bensonhurst. In all likelihood, so were his buddies. The young man who spoke glared at me and said, "We got business here. You need to get your ass moving." I chuckled and said, "I don't think so." Chapter 14. I made an effort not to move or show my intentions in any way. The young men from Brooklyn stared me down. Maybe no one had ever told them no. That was the problem with about half the people in the criminal justice system. Their parents told them they could do no wrong. and they took it to mean they could do anything without consequences. Clearly, Ronald didn't want to talk to these guys in front of me. He was trying to calm them down and get them to come back later. The guy who'd been doing all the talking, the one in a tight t-shirt with a tattoo of the devil on his left forearm, looked at me and said, "I told you, get out." And I said, I would prefer to stay here. I tried to keep a pleasant expression on my face, but no matter how you looked at it, we were in a standoff. Now, the second young man stepped forward. He was about 22, tall and ripped. The gold crucifix around his neck dangled outside his Snoop Dogg t-shirt. His sharp brown eyes stared right at me. "Listen, mister, we got business with Ronald. It don't concern you." Another Brooklyn kid trying to act tough. I kept my face neutral and said, "Thanks, but I'll refer you to my earlier answer. I think I'll stay." The young man inched closer to me. He wore checkerboard Vans like a surfer, and the rubber soles squeaked a little on the painted concrete floor. He growled at me. "Do you know who my father is?" I said, "No. Does your mother?" The insult took longer to sink in than I thought it would. When the young man realized what I'd said, his eyes bulged and he took another step toward me. That's when I calmly moved a bar stool with my foot. It was part of a 4-piece set with some kind of bird etched into the contoured seat. Ronald had bought the whole set on sale for $199. I'd been expecting one of the Brooklyn boys to advance. That's why I'd hooked my foot through the leg of the stool before I ever opened my mouth. The young man stumbled on the stool for a moment, then had a change of heart. He eased back toward his friends. They looked like football defenders in formation. They were ready for a fight. Some of this was my fault for having a little fun. I decided to take a different tack. I said, "I can't leave. I'm Ronald's attorney." The young man with the devil tattoo said, "I thought he was an attorney. He's got an Esquire at the end of his name." I looked at Ronald Higdon Esquire. It appeared he did tell everyone he was a lawyer. I turned toward the 3 Brooklynites. "Why does he work at a pawn shop if he's a lawyer?" He said he was tired of the bullshit in the criminal justice system. We all are, but that doesn't give you the right to barge in here and threaten him. He gave us $300 for some little metal people. Ronald mumbled, "Figurines. Whatever they're called. We found out the 4 of them were worth about $2,500. Not a measly 300. We want the rest of the money." He dropped his voice and added, "Now." He pulled an old-school straight razor from his pocket. He flicked it open to let us all get a good look at it. The whole idea of an edged weapon like that is to instill fear. It was working. Chapter 15. Instead of goading the young men any further, I did the lame adult thing. I pulled out my ID. I let them see the badge and said, "NYPD. Do you boys want to spend a few days at Rikers?" All 3 of the young men laughed. I had to ask, what the hell is so funny? A cop telling us what to do. The mayor of New York City says cops can't do shit no more. We didn't do nothing that you could arrest us for. This is a private matter. It would have been, except you had to go and pull the razor. I'm not going to let anyone get cut while I'm standing right here. One of the punks said, "Then you should probably leave." Another added, "That would be the smartest move for you." I doubt any of you know the smartest move for yourselves, let alone someone else. Do you really want to make this a police matter? The young punk kept the razor open in his hand. "There ain't even bail no more. You can arrest me, but I'll be hitting the clubs in a couple hours. You guys ain't the big cheese no more. We are." I canted my body slightly and kept my right hand loose at my side in case I needed to draw my pistol. I didn't want to do it. It would escalate the situation. But I wanted to be cut by a straight razor even less. I was so concentrated on the man with the razor that I didn't notice Ronald leaning back to press the button to open the door. I jerked my head up at the loud buzzing sound and saw the door burst open. 2 men and a woman rushed into the shop. The new arrivals were all black. Both the men were older than the Brooklyn punks, maybe in their mid-30s. The woman was a little younger than her companions. She was tall, with broad shoulders, and had wild hair with pink highlights shot through it like lightning. I saw the smile on Ronald's face and knew these were friends of his. The looks on the punks' faces were phenomenal. The tallest of the new arrivals, who had to have at least 50 pounds on any of the Brooklyn boys, looked at my informant and said, "Everything all right, Ronald?" "That depends on how you look at it. These three just busted in here, threatened me with the razor, and told this man there was nothing cops could do about it. Just about then, I buzzed you into the shop." The man turned and stared at the three Brooklyn boys. "So, you think no one would do anything to you if you cut up Ronald with your blade? You think anyone will do something about this?" He swung his left elbow hard and caught the man with the razor right across the temple. The razor clattered onto the concrete floor, immediately followed by the young man's dazed body. The woman swung her right hand and connected with the next punk. His nose shattered under her closed fist. She shifted slightly and punched the other man in the face with the same hand. I stood and took in the show. It was like a boxing match without all the extraneous hoopla. Blood gushed out of the one man's nose. The second man had stumbled back and fallen onto the floor. The man who'd held the razor was desperately trying to stand. As soon as he got to his feet, the woman shoved him back down to the ground. He looked at me and whined, "You're a cop. You have to help us." "You already told me the mayor said I can't do shit." I winked at the three people who'd just come in. The big man smiled. The woman tried to hide her smile but then started to giggle. I told the one Brooklyn punk to leave the razor on the floor as he stood up. The three of them scurried to the door as a group. I said, "I want you boys to go home and look up the word karma. If you have any brains at all, you'll realize you just had a master class in it." I was still smiling after Ronald had buzzed them out, and they ran away. Chapter 16. After my adventure at the pawn shop of Ronald Higdon, Esquire, I thought it might be a good time for a change of pace. It had been a very busy autumn. I missed seeing my grandfather. Like a lot of things, I was afraid I'd taken those off-the-cuff talks with the old priest for granted. It wasn't just me who was busy. My grandfather had taken on an important new role for the church. He was working hard at using the resources available to him to help the entire community. He had set up a literacy program staffed by seniors at the school. He'd set up a sports program at a nearby park and convinced the fire department to provide coaches twice a week. Seamus Bennett's vitality hadn't diminished with age. Because both of our lives had sped up so drastically, my grandfather had missed dinner with the family for a record 5 nights in a row. We'd spoken on the phone briefly, but I hadn't seen him face to face since he came to dinner almost a week ago. I walked to the administrative offices of Holy Name Catholic Church. The path that led to my grandfather's office was neatly maintained. Patio stones marked the route in a serpentine pattern instead of straight ahead. I tapped on the door before turning the knob. Even though Seamus was into his 80s, there was no telling what I would find when I stepped past the door. Would he be drinking a hidden beer? Would he be playing cards with one of his buddies? Would he be yelling at some patron who hadn't come through with money for his community programs? It was always an interesting question. Instead, I found my grandfather on the phone discussing a proposal to provide free lunches to needy kids on the weekends. He had found a supplier who could provide simple meals and some city agency that would pay for it. I smiled as I listened to his rational voice while he finished his conversation. As soon as he hung up, Seamus smiled at me. "I feel blessed by the Lord Almighty that you could find time in your busy schedule to come by and visit an elderly priest. Can it? You've been just as busy as me. And I'll bet that you're really here to talk about your 2 sons and their encounter with some bullies yesterday." I smiled. His Irish accent made everything sound pleasant and at the same time like an accusation. "I do want to talk about the incident. The boys seem pretty open, but I wanted to make sure they didn't leave anything out." My grandfather said, They told you it happened down the street and not on school grounds, right? I'm not looking to assign liability, just wondering what happened. My grandfather held up his hands like he was trying to keep me calm. I know. Didn't mean to come on so strong. I'm just so used to dealing with parents who are outraged about one thing or another. One father complained that we were talking about Jesus in class. Imagine that! A Catholic school that mentions Christ. God save us from stupidity. I waved off his apology. I haven't been mad at the school for anything since I got detention in 6th grade for horsing around with Matthew Callahan. Seamus sighed. All I know is what the boys told me. They were wearing their school shirts, and I think that's what attracted the other boys. It's sort of a cool thing now to single out kids in any kind of a religious school. Maybe that's what they were trying to do. Any ideas on how to keep it from happening again? If the boys stayed on school property, they'd be fine. I understand that. But I also don't want them to be afraid to walk down the street. There should be some kind of middle ground. That's the way it is with everything. Politics, sports, anything humans are involved in. There should be some middle ground, but usually no one looks for it. People stake out their positions and rarely want to listen to the other side. He leaned in and looked at me more closely. Sweet Jesus, but you look tired. Did you get any sleep last night? I just shrugged, a homicide detective's universal answer to that question. Then I heard the opening chords to the piano solo from Layla and reached for my phone. It was Terry Hernandez. I picked up immediately. Terry said, They just found a body in New Rochelle. It's Juliana's friend, Suzanne Morton. I muttered shit. I popped up and headed for the door, waving goodbye to my grandfather. He nodded back. How many times had this happened on the job over the years? Even before he was a priest and worked in the bar he owned. When the NYPD called, I went running. It rarely mattered who I was with or what I was doing. At least my grandfather understood the meaning of the word duty. Chapter 17. As I navigated the roads north, I was torn. Should I phone Mary Catherine and Juliana to break the news, or wait until I had more information? It was always a tough call. I could hardly even contemplate what hearing words like that might mean to me. I let the idea wash through my brain, felt my anxiety rise. The whole drive was just images of Suzanne Morton in my house, laughing and preparing for life after school. About 40 minutes north of the city, wedged in with half a dozen other towns in Westchester County, New Rochelle was not the kind of place accustomed to murder. I pictured Suzanne's parents, David and Rachel. I didn't envy the poor New Rochelle police officer who would have to drive to notify her parents in Yonkers that their daughter had been found, and that she was dead. Every cop remembers giving their first death notification. There's nothing in the academy, and no training that can adequately prepare you to tell someone a family member is dead. It doesn't matter if the death is from a car accident, a drowning, or a homicide. It's difficult to look at a mother's face and tell her that her child won't be coming home. My first notification was about 8 days after I started with the NYPD. I was in the Bronx, and my training officer got the call that we were to notify a family that their daughter had been struck by a truck and killed in East Harlem. My training officer said, the best way to learn was to do it by myself. Later I realized the veteran patrol officer hated to make notifications. Seeing people in grief tore him up. He'd paused at the front of the building with me, saying, be honest, be direct, and try to be helpful. Those are the only rules. If helpful means you stand there and listen to them cry for 10 minutes, that's what you do. If helpful means leaving them alone, then you exit immediately. My right hand had trembled as I knocked on the second-floor apartment door not far from Yankee Stadium. A woman about 45 and dressed in surgical scrubs answered the door. She was a nurse about to go on shift. As soon as she saw me, she blurted out, "Who is it? My husband? My son? My daughter?" Later I realized that nurses see as much death as cops do. They know the danger is out in the world. I'd wanted to stick to the script and make sure I had everything perfect. Instead, I just looked at the ground and sort of mumbled, "I'm so sorry. Your daughter was hit by a garbage truck." She was pronounced dead at the scene. At the time, it might have been one of the hardest things I'd ever said to someone, and the response was exactly what I thought it would be. The woman stumbled back, flopped onto a small floral couch, and started to weep. Wail might be a more accurate term. I had no idea what to do. I stepped into the apartment and eased onto the couch near the woman. I just sat there while she sobbed. I asked her if I could help in any way or perhaps make a phone call. She just shook her head. About 25 minutes later, my training officer came up to the apartment to see what had happened. He said I did the right thing sitting with her. No death notification has ever been easy. Now, I found myself parked in the lot beside the bland tan building that housed the police department on North Avenue in New Rochelle. I raced up the sidewalk's low incline toward the front steps. Just as I made it through the set of glass doors, I saw Rachel and David Morton standing by the reception desk. My stomach tightened, and I tried to put on a calm face. Rachel looked up as I was walking toward them. She immediately burst into tears. David took her in his arms and stroked her hair. He just stared at me silently. "I am so sorry. I was hoping for the best. I don't know what to say." David Morton had a distant look on his face as he said to me, "Someone stuffed our little girl in a cabinet behind an empty construction office. They think she's been there at least 2 weeks. His voice started to break. Then he said in a louder voice, 2 fucking weeks. Over the years, I've found that families of a missing person feel their loss twice when that missing person turns out to be a homicide victim. The pain can be unbearable. Families are ripped apart, and parents have even committed suicide over the death of a child. I know never to take the reactions of a grieving family personally. They have a lot to process. I stood with them in reception until a detective stepped out to meet them. She looked at me like I was a representative for the family. I just badged her and said, I was hoping to talk to the lead detective on the case. We all awkwardly walked through the open door and down a long, sterile hallway. I saw a few cops I knew from joint cases or training. New Rochelle had a dedicated homicide detective. Once that detective was overwhelmed, the department rotated the homicides that occurred within its city limits among 3 detectives who handled other crimes in addition to homicide. Once I got the Morton settled with a victim advocate, I headed off to find out who had been assigned the case. I saw a detective I'd known for years. She specialized in crimes against children, but I had to know who had caught this homicide. I said, Sandy, who got assigned the body they found this morning? She rolled her eyes and shrugged as she said, Bill Stanton. I muttered, shit, not Suicide Stanton. Chapter 18. I followed Sandy through the small building to the detective bureau. It was more hectic than I would have expected for a town of 80,000 people. I scanned the room for Bill Stanton, the detective who'd caught the homicide, and saw the 54-year-old balding detective at a desk in the corner. As usual, he had a washcloth next to him, which he used to wipe the sweat from his forehead about every 3 minutes. No one had ever told me whether he had a medical condition. I wasn't about to ask. He got his nickname, Suicide, as a joke. All nicknames cops give one another are jokes. Some are in poor taste. Some are extraordinarily clever. This one was somewhere in between. Stanton had an excellent clearance rate for death investigations, but an unusually large percentage of those clearances were classified as suicide. It seemed to be his working theory on every unnatural death. He created elaborate reconstructions to prove suicide, even if the theories worked only 1 in 10 times. I'd never heard of anyone else doing that. I didn't know if it was because Stanton was competitive or lazy. But that was how he'd earned his name, clearing cases via suicide. He glanced up at me and said in a fast clip, "You want to take one of my cases? I just got a new homicide. Tell me you think she was killed in the city and her body was moved up here? I'll be happy to give you everything I have on the case." He grabbed the washcloth and wiped his forehead. "I wish it was that simple. She's a friend of my daughter. I've been keeping her parents informed on Suzanne's missing persons case. I'm sorry to hear there's a personal connection, but I gotta tell you, Bennett, all kinds of shit has been dropping around here. The burglary rate is off the charts. Armed robberies are up in all of the Westchester towns, and this homicide is our 5th since May. That may not cause a stir in Manhattan, but it's a big deal here. I'm here because of the Mortons, and I wanted to find out the circumstances of her death. We're wondering if this homicide could be linked to a couple of deaths we're looking at in the city. It's a possibility." That caught Stanton's attention. "Are you talking serial killer?" He reached again for the washcloth. "It's a possibility. But if it is, you won't be able to write this one off as a suicide." Stanton scowled at me. "That shit's not funny. I don't even know how that nickname got started." I held up my hands. I retract my snarky comment. "What do you want from me, Bennett?" "Details about the body? Method of death? Everything. Look, Bennett, you're a good guy. I'd like to work with you, but right now I'm getting screamed at for a briefing with our assistant chief, the mayor, and my captain. We've only had the body a couple of hours. I haven't even seen it yet. Let me get back to you tomorrow or the next day when I have more information." Reluctantly, I agreed to leave and call him the next day. I didn't want to say something I might regret. I didn't understand a homicide detective who hadn't gone out to the scene immediately. I didn't care if he had half a dozen other cases. As I worked my way through the maze of hallways, I saw the Mortons sitting in a small but comfortable-looking room. Suzanne's mother dabbed her eyes with a Kleenex. Her father just stared at the victim advocate. I weighed the risk of stepping into the room. I didn't want to upset them any more than they already were. Or maybe I was just trying to justify avoiding something I didn't want to do. Just then, I glanced at my watch. It kicked me into gear. I was supposed to be at Holy Name coaching the first practice of the girls' basketball team in a little over half an hour. Chapter 19. I was already wearing an official blue Holy Name basketball coach's shirt. I didn't say anything about the mustard stain on the collar or the hole under the arm. The shirt had probably been around since I was a student here. The girls were already huddled in a group at the corner of the bleachers. A relatively new nun named Sister Elizabeth was checking uniforms and talking to the girls. When she noticed me, she stepped away from the group to talk to me in private. She had a flat Midwestern accent. "Mr. Bennett, I'm thrilled you agreed to coach. Your height alone is going to give you credibility." I laughed at that. Then I looked at the group and said, "Are there any assistant coaches?" Sister Elizabeth looked stricken. Finally, she said, "I'm sorry. You're the only parent who answered the call to service. But I can help. I played some ball in college, and I have a few ideas for the girls." "If you played college basketball, you're eminently more qualified to coach these girls than I am." "The problem is, I also coach volleyball and field hockey. I can't always be here just for basketball. Sister Sheila said that you'd enjoy coaching and that you were good with the kids. I guess you'd have to be if you've got 10 of your own." I liked this young woman who said what was on her mind. "In your opinion, how were the girls' skills?" She hesitated. "About what you would think they'd be. Except for your daughter Fiona. She's shown some real ability." "Really? That's good to hear." "Not only does she have a decent jumper, she also goes to the basket hard. She's fearless." I smiled as I looked over at my beautiful daughter talking with her friends on the team. "She gets that from playing hoops with her brothers. They don't cut her any slack. She wouldn't survive if she didn't throw the occasional elbow or take a hit once in a while. If she wasn't tough and aggressive, she'd hardly see the ball." I got the girls together and started some simple drills. First, they warmed up by dribbling all the way around the edges of the court 3 times. Then we did a few shooting drills. Sister Elizabeth was right. I was impressed at how Fiona confidently handled the ball. Then she started sinking everything from 12 to 15 feet out. How had this slipped my notice until now? The boys always said she was okay, not great, just okay. Had she been holding out on them? She was smart. Maybe she'd been trying to sandbag them for some big reveal down the road. I enjoyed seeing the girls concentrate so hard. After a while, I noticed my grandfather at the very top of the bleachers watching the practice. Even with 10 great-grandchildren, the man managed to show up for almost every function. I felt a wave of melancholy as I thought about poor Suzanne Morton. It can be easy to get sucked into an endless loop of despair and hopelessness with this job. Early on in my career, a senior homicide detective told me that no matter what I see on the job, life goes on. I was trying to honor that sentiment right now. But watching these girls laughing and playing made me think of how many things Suzanne would never again experience. All I could do was prepare these girls to play as best they could. That's what life goes on means. Chapter 20. I was happy to get back to the apartment a little earlier than usual. Today hadn't been as long as yesterday, but it was still trying. Thank God I'd had the chance to spend some time with Fiona and the basketball team. I was still amazed at how good Fiona was. The whole team had some skills. Sister Elizabeth had done a great job teaching them the basics of the game. I see rudderless kids on the street with no direction, no adult to encourage them, and no real interest in most activities. I learned when I was a kid that sports provide a place to have fun, get some exercise, and give some focus. I feel it's important for kids to keep busy. I'm lucky that I've never had to force any of my kids to join a club or try a new activity. They all seem pretty interested in a lot of different things. From arts and crafts to cooking, each of the kids has a serious interest. Juliana has her acting, Jane writes in her journals and is a phenomenal student. My oldest son Brian is working hard at straightening out his life and is enjoying his job at an air conditioning repair company. I found Mary Catherine in the kitchen. I was excited to tell her how well Fiona had played. I really felt like basketball could be Fiona's thing. I swept my wife up in a hug, but instantly felt something wasn't right. I took a step back, looked at her, and asked, "What's wrong?" She led me by the hand to the living room where Ricky and Eddie were playing a video game. A video game during daylight hours? Usually that would be a rule infraction. But Mary Catherine eased up on the rules when the kids weren't feeling well or had had a bad day. I didn't see any fresh cuts or bruises. Mary Catherine said, "The same boys bothered them again today." I looked to Eddie to tell me the whole story. He started up instantly. "Dad, we weren't causing problems. We went down the street to the other basketball hoop. Trent was going to meet us after he put something in his locker. Before we even got to the court, I heard someone say, 'Look, the little Christians are back.' It was the same two boys, and they had another boy with them. When Trent wandered up and asked what was going on, one of the boys punched him right in the face." I glanced around the apartment. "Where is Trent now?" Mary Catherine said, "He's cleaning up in the hallway bathroom." I broke off from our conversation and rushed to the bathroom. Trent was sitting on the edge of the tub, holding a washcloth to his nose. It wasn't a lot of blood, but any blood coming out of your kids is too much. "You okay?" I tried to keep my voice calm. Inside, I was burning up. Someone punched my kid. Feels like the time I fell off the skateboard and landed right on my face. He didn't sound mad. That was Trent. He tended to go with events rather than fight them. I sat there with him for a couple of minutes. He said he hadn't seen the bullies until it was too late. I listened. Then we both went back out to the other boys to hear the rest of the story. As we walked into the living room, Mary Catherine said, "You haven't heard the worst of it yet." She turned to Ricky and said, "Tell your father what happened just before you went back to Holy Name." Ricky said, "The guy who punched Trent lifted his shirt. He had a pistol stuffed in his waistband." "What kind of pistol?" "A black one." The universal, unhelpful description from people unfamiliar with guns. I was able to piece together a few more questions to get a better picture of the situation. I looked at the boys sternly and said, "For now, stay on the school grounds. Don't risk going down to that hoop. We'll figure out how to fix this. Is that understood?" I was satisfied, as all three boys nodded. Chapter 21. After dinner, I was dragging and ready to turn in a little early. Brian caught me in the hallway. He looked ready for bed too, but said, "Hey, Dad, you got a second?" "Of course. Eddie told me about the trouble they're having. I could go with them one day after work and hang out at the park where they keep seeing the bullies." "You're a good big brother, Brian, and I certainly appreciate the offer, but it's better to just stay away from the park for now. I don't want any of you mixed up with boys who carry guns. Plus, if you did something to help your brothers, someone might try to turn it around on you. You don't want to mess with your parole. You've done everything right since you got released. You got a good job. You're even taking a class at City College. I wouldn't want to screw that up for anything in the world." We didn't often talk about Brian's stint in prison. He knew he'd made a mistake, trying to fit in by selling designer drugs, making a few extra bucks. But he'd gotten swept up in the excitement. He was lucky he hadn't been killed. I still didn't know if his release was directly related to influence from the mayor. The mayor had said he would help after I found his missing daughter, but the mayor of New York was not known for keeping his word. Regardless, not long after I found his daughter, I got a surprise call that Brian was being released. Now it felt like a hole in my life had been filled. A few minutes later, I was easing my head down onto my hypoallergenic memory foam oversized pillow, and it felt like I was using a drug. My body instantly relaxed and started to sink into the mattress. Mary Catherine had the thermostat turned low, and the room was already dark. It was perfect. Then she slipped into the bed with me and slid close, draping her arm across my chest and resting her head on my shoulder. She said in a low voice, "Tell me about the best part of your day." I said, "Our first basketball practice went really well. Fiona has some serious skills. I think her talk about a scholarship isn't too far out of line. I also think Sister Elizabeth put some of it in her head. But I liked coaching." Mary Catherine squeezed me. I turned to hold her as well. "How about your day?" "I was doing research on fertility treatments." "Did you learn anything new?" "Are you kidding me? I have about 500 more questions since reading a few articles. I can't believe how complex the process can be, or how it can wreck your body. I thought it was pregnancy that can wreck your body." "So then it's a double wreck." She giggled then. I lay there and held her, feeling her steady breathing and heartbeat against my body. She propped herself up on her elbow and looked at me. "Be honest with me. How do you feel about the prospect of another child in this home?" I considered the question as well as the tone in which it had been asked. All I wanted was to be supportive. "I think it would be great, but I need you in my life, healthy and happy. If this treatment is dangerous, then I want us to both think about it carefully. You say the sweetest things without letting me know how you really feel." What can I say? It's a tough question, but I'll think about it seriously. That's all I can ask. Would a new baby speak English or Irish? She laughed and punched my chest playfully. Then, we didn't go right to sleep. Chapter 22. I was up and out of the house quickly the next day. I was going to visit one of my least favorite places, NYPD headquarters at One Police Plaza in Lower Manhattan, almost at the foot of the Brooklyn Bridge. No working detective enjoys time at One Police Plaza. Today I had two people to talk to inside the building. Gary Avram, my main contact in the missing persons squad, and Gary's wife, Kathy Figler, a sergeant in the juvenile unit. Kathy was used to dealing with kids who caused problems. I was hoping to get her opinion on how I should deal with the bullies bothering my boys near Holy Name. I greeted half a dozen people as I walked through the lobby, but the place definitely lacks the camaraderie found in a regular precinct. In a neighborhood precinct, There is no question you are all in this together. Here, everyone is looking out for themselves or trying to climb the ladder. I took the elevator to the 7th floor, then found the small squad bay that held the missing persons unit. Most people have no idea how many missing persons there are in the United States. And when I say most people, I'm including the police. There are so many ways a person might disappear. Most of the time, there's very little to go on with a missing person. I found Gary Avram at his standing desk, a real anomaly inside the old-fashioned NYPD. A serious powerlifter, Gary was the kind of guy who told anyone who would listen that sitting was the new smoking. He was in his usual monogrammed, long-sleeved white shirt with a blue tie, and nodded as I approached his desk. I waited in silence while he finished whatever he was working on. After 30 seconds, he looked up at me. "This damn crossword gets harder every week." Gary had a prankster streak, and I swear I didn't know if he was joking now or not. Then he put on a serious face and said, "Sorry to hear that your daughter's friend was found in New Rochelle, but that explains why we had 0 good leads on her disappearance. That's why I'm here. I have an idea. She's the 3rd college student found murdered in the last 2 months. We considered her a missing person. Do you think there might be similar victims we've listed as missing persons?" Gary didn't hesitate to reach across his absurdly tall desk and grab 3 file folders. He let them drop in front of me. "What's this?" I asked. "I'm big, not dense. I saw the reports from your and Hernandez's homicides. I usually look through ECMS to see if I can clear any missing persons. I saw that both of your victims were similar, just like Suzanne Morton. College students. Beautiful. Bright. These are the only 3 in the past 2 years that fully match your victims." He added, "We haven't done much with any of these cases. The reports are all in the files." "Gary, this is great. I'm impressed. That means something coming from a homicide detective. I know you guys think you've got the toughest assignment." I knew some homicide detectives could be openly dismissive of other units. I just thanked him and said, "Guess who I'm visiting next?" "You must mean my wife. But if you came to our house, you'd be visiting us. If you come to the office, you're bothering us," Gary teased. "Kathy and I have a strict rule never to discuss work at home. We think it would adversely affect the boys." "Smart. Even here, during the workday, she's Sergeant Figler, and I'm Detective Avram. Then I won't tell you where I'm going from here. You can mention how I'm on top of things. That would be okay." I laughed. Most men want to impress their spouses. I'd probably say the same thing. Chapter 23. I took the stairs down 3 floors from missing persons to the juvenile unit. There was less risk of running into command staff on the dingy stairs that few people used. The juvenile unit was housed with a few other specialty units. They didn't even have their own squad bay. The juvenile unit worked at containing crime by people under 18. Even if some of the crimes were as horrendous as adult crimes, there were rules in place to protect the young suspects. No one really disagreed, but it made working in the unit more complicated. I've always believed the best juvenile crime detectives also liked working with young people. They viewed their encounters with young offenders as opportunities for them to turn their lives around. This approach became much more important to me after my son Brian was arrested for drug dealing. I considered Kathy Figler to be one of the best cops I knew. I was glad the NYPD was putting her talents to use in something as important as the juvenile unit. I said hello to a couple of other detectives I knew in the unit as I navigated to the sergeant's office in the back. You could see the turnaround for the Brooklyn Bridge and a hint of the East River from Kathy Figler's window, a prize status symbol among the inhabitants of One Police Plaza. The petite blonde woman smiled when she saw me and got up to give me a hug. She said, "What on earth would convince a homicide detective from Manhattan North to visit the juvenile unit at headquarters? Actually, or at least officially, I had to talk to your husband about some missing persons cases. Detective Avram does a great job. I hope he was able to help. I smiled at her deadpan response. More than anyone has helped me in months, or I should say, he provided me with the most efficient help I've had this year. I wish he showed some of that initiative around the house. We chatted about our families for a moment. Then I explained to her the problems my boys have been having down the street from Holy Name. Kathy listened and made notes. One thing the couple shared was their intensity and devotion to their jobs. I liked that. I hate hearing that one of the bullies had a gun, she said. Ever since the city cut out funding for the anti-crime unit, we've seen instances of gun crime increase. The city disbanded the unit but tells everyone to keep doing what they were doing. It's crazy. Do you have any advice or insight on what my boys should do? Staying on the school grounds would be the first step. I get what you're saying about not wanting them to be afraid to walk the streets of New York, but keeping them out of the situation is smart. I'll ask around and see if any of our detectives have heard the same sort of complaints. Maybe we can even get a security video showing the instigators so we can try to identify them. I appreciate anything you can do. My boys are a little rattled. Who would have thought we'd long for the days when there were fistfights in the schoolyards? The anti-bullying initiatives have helped in some places, but it's still a serious issue. Everyone is focused on cyberbullying right now. I said, I guess it's easy to bully someone over the internet when you don't even have to show your face in person. And herd mentality tends to favor the bully. Sometimes whole classes start to harass a student. I don't envy you. I'll stick with homicide. Sergeant Figler said, and we're glad you will. Chapter 24. I raced down the front steps of one police plaza already knowing what I was going to do. Detective Gary Avram had given me some great leads. Conveniently, the first address he'd supplied was just on the other side of the Brooklyn Bridge. I looked at the file and saw that this girl was the right age, 18, but appeared to have run away from home last year. Her mother answered the door and informed me that the young woman had sent her a text a month ago, telling her she was safe but that she never wanted contact with the family again. That was not an issue I needed to get involved in. The second missing persons case was in Lower Manhattan. Very nice 3-story walk-up. Turned out the missing girl answered the door herself. She explained that she had fallen in love and run off with another student from Barnard but came home last week. The family was so happy, they'd forgotten to let the NYPD know. Case closed. The third missing persons case listed the missing person's residence as a single-family home in Queens, a few blocks from Astoria Park. I drove out there, then sat in my car for a moment to glance at the file again. If it was another wild goose chase, at least I'd have cleared up all 3 leads in one morning. Cheryl Savage was a junior at Columbia when she disappeared last fall. She had been a stellar high school athlete, playing basketball, softball, and lacrosse. Her photo showed a tall, striking young woman with neat auburn hair and a dazzling smile. Her roommate at Columbia had said Cheryl went out one night, and she never saw her again. A single security video from her dorm showed her leaving the building dressed in a cocktail dress. No one had any idea where she'd gone, and there had been no activity on her phone since the night she disappeared. I felt a little sad closing the file. Although I saw it all the time, I knew it would break my heart if any of my kids disappeared. I'm not sure I could ever function properly again. A girl about 7 was sitting on the home steps. When she looked up, I saw a resemblance to Cheryl Savage. She had the same auburn hair, and there was something about her eyes that seemed similar to the girl in the photo. I stood back on the sidewalk to keep from startling the little girl. I smiled and said, "Hi. I need to get past you to ring the bell. Is that okay?" The girl's hazel eyes took me in. She looked like she was about to say something. I never heard it. Something crashed into me on my left side. I saw a flicker of movement just before I felt the impact. I hit a decorative light post which sort of spun me and made me step off the curb. The cascading effect of the surprise blow and the loss of balance almost sent me into the street in front of a delivery truck. The truck's tires screeched as the driver laid on his horn. In New York, the horn is the first option for all situations. The truck skidded to a halt, and I managed to jump a foot back so that the front fender missed me by an inch. I heard the driver scream something at me through the closed windows. Finally, I looked back to see the threat. A wiry man in his mid-40s stood next to the stairs with his fists clenched. He didn't want to fight. He wanted to kick my ass. Chapter 25. I turned to fully face the man, a little dazed as the truck pulled away slowly. The driver was still yelling curses at me from the cab of the truck. I kept my eyes on the man who'd so forcefully knocked into me. I wondered how a guy that small could generate such force. I stepped back onto the sidewalk to the left of the man. He didn't say a word. His eyes were fixed on me. Then he growled, "Get away from my daughter before I take your damn head off." It all came into focus for me. I said, "Mr. Savage?" He stared at me, then said, "Who are you?" I reached into my pocket and pulled out my badge. "Mike Bennett, NYPD. Instantly, the look on the man's face told me he realized his mistake. He took a step toward me, but I held up my hand and he froze in place. "I'm so sorry. I just saw you talking to my daughter and I snapped. Obviously, you know my oldest daughter is missing. I'm not about to lose another one." I nodded and straightened up. Then I moved my shoulder to make sure everything was still in the proper socket. His expression changed. "Are you here with new information on Cheryl?" I shook my head. "I'm looking at some other crimes." I hesitated to use the word homicides. I didn't want to freak him out. I was hoping to ask you a few questions about your daughter. A few minutes later, I was sitting in the living room of the home. Chuck Savage and his wife Regina sat across from me and answered all of my questions about Cheryl. She was a happy girl, didn't have a crazy dating life, no ex-boyfriends who threatened her. They had not heard one word from or about her since the September evening she disappeared last year. Regina Savage had a melancholy tone to her voice, the sort of thing I heard from homicide victims' families. She may not have understood exactly why I was asking these questions, but she was no idiot. Mrs. Savage said, "You're trying to figure out if my Cheryl is dead, aren't you?" I hesitated as I searched for the right words. "I have no reason to think your daughter is dead. I have another case that might, and I can't say positively, have a victim similar to your daughter's description. I'm trying to run down every possible lead." The tired-looking woman lowered her head and nodded it slightly. As cold and calculating as it sounds, I looked at Cheryl's disappearance as a chance to gain more information. Maybe we could use it to stop this killer from claiming more victims. Chapter 26. Just as I was leaving Queens, I got a text from Bill Stanton at the New Rochelle Police Department. He wanted to meet at the Starbucks on 145th Street near Jackie Robinson Park. I told him I'd be there in less than 30 minutes. This was not an opportunity I intended to pass up, though I wasn't looking forward to getting the rest of the information on Suzanne Morton. A mere 23 minutes later, I stepped into the Starbucks. The place was moderately busy. I craned my neck and saw Bill Suicide Stanton sitting by himself in the corner. A hard copy case file rested on the small table in front of him. An extra-large coffee cup scribbled with the name Bill sat next to the folder. I eased onto the stool across from him. "What brings you all the way down to the city, Bill?" "I had to talk to Suzanne Morton's parents." Sweat started to build on his brow. "Ugh, I don't envy you at all. It was brutal. I swear, Bennett, I'd rather get shot at than talk to grieving parents. It sucks the life out of you. I'll have more nightmares about my conversation with them than I would if I had a car accident." I knew Suicide Stanton hadn't come here to discuss his psychological hang-ups. I said, "What can I do for you, Bill?" He looked down, removed a handkerchief from his jacket pocket and wiped his face. He mumbled something and shoved the case file toward me. "Bill, I have no idea what you just said." He swallowed hard, sat up straight and said, "If this case is related to a serial killer, I have to admit I'm in over my head. Way over my head. I can't tell you how many stories I've read in the daily news about your cases involving serial killers over the years. I'm willing to transfer the entire case over to you." I let out a laugh. "I bet you are. There are a couple of problems with that." "Like what?" "My chief won't care. As far as he's concerned, it's another closed case. One less thing for New Rochelle to worry about." I understood what Stanton was trying to do. I couldn't ever do it myself. The idea of handing a case of mine over to someone else just sounded weird. But I understood that if you had a caseload that included everything from burglaries to homicides, you might have to clear your plate any way you could. I thought about it for a few moments. Finally, I said, "The first thing we need to worry about is establishing that there is definitely a single killer. We're working on a theory based on 2 bodies we've recovered that were dressed in a similar manner and had similar backgrounds. I'm trying to piece together the rest. We don't even know for sure if we have a serial killer case yet." He looked at me hopefully. He raised his eyebrows and pushed the file folder a little closer. I let out a sigh. "You realize the NYPD would frown on me investigating homicides in other cities, right? We can at least work it together until you decide if the murders are related or not. Aside from Suzanne being a pretty college student, I don't know if any of the circumstances of her death match up. Like, how was she dressed? What was the cause of death? When did the death occur? We still have a lot of questions like that to answer." Stanton's face lost its scowl. It was like I'd given him a glimmer of hope. He started talking quickly. She was nude and wrapped in a painter's dropcloth. Cause of death was blunt trauma to the head. She was hit with something heavy with a round base. The killer was strong enough to leave an imprint of the weapon in the victim's skull. How long had she been in the cabinet before anyone found her? A medical examiner and forensic people estimate about 3 weeks, right around the date she disappeared. I made a few notes, then leveled my eyes at the detective. "I'm not saying this will all work out, but let's keep in touch. It's better to be prepared than be surprised." "I agree. I also agree to let you take this case whenever you want." I chuckled. "Okay, Bill. If these do turn out to be related, there's nothing I want more than to find Suzanne Morton's killer." Then I heard the opening piano chords to my ringtone. Stanton let out a laugh and said, "Layla, love it." The 3-number exchange code made it clear it was someone from One Police Plaza. That was rarely good news. Chapter 27. Bill Stanton was annoyed I wouldn't take his homicide case yet. I left him at the table with just a final nod as I walked quickly out of the Starbucks to answer my phone. Someone speaking very quickly said their name and title, but I didn't catch any of it. I said, "I'm sorry, who is this?" The woman slowed down like she was talking to a child. "This is Persephone Garland. I work in the Office of Public Outreach. I think we might have found a lead on your case." "A lead? On my most recent homicide?" "I'm not following how public relations uncovered a lead." "Public outreach. What's the difference? I'd get paid more if it was a public relations job." I laughed. She'd already picked up a cop's sense of humor even if she worked in a non-sworn position. She said, "Can you stop by my office? I have the info from the tip all right here. It came from a post on social media I put up about the body you recovered from the Hudson River." "I'll be there as quick as I can." I cut off the call before I started asking questions about the privacy of the victim's family, or who had approved using an active homicide as part of community outreach. She'd better have some good answers or a hell of a lead. Otherwise, I was going to be annoyed. Loudly annoyed. 2 trips to One Police Plaza in one day was very unusual. I hoped to keep it that way. I marched into the public outreach office about 30 minutes after I got the call. I kept thinking about Estella Abreu's family, and if they'd seen the social media post. I would have liked to have given them a heads up before it came out. The office was empty. For a moment I thought I'd walked into the wrong place. To be honest, I'd never been in the public outreach office. I knew they existed and occasionally interacted with the people who worked in the unit. Most of them were marketing and technical people. Their job was to get out the word about what the NYPD was doing and how the public could help. I stood by the door to the office and called out, "Hello?" A young woman stepped out from one of the rear cubicles. "Detective Bennett, right? I'm Persephone Garland." Persephone was a very attractive black woman in a professional blouse and skirt, but she looked impossibly young enough to easily pass for one of my teen daughters. As soon as she saw me, Persephone smiled and started walking toward me. But she must have seen the look on my face because she stopped, folded her arms, and said, "No, I'm not a kid. I'm 24 years old and a University of Maryland graduate. I'm not questioning your qualifications." "I'm not offended at all, Detective. In fact, I'm an Army brat. I'm not offended by anything, except maybe extreme stupidity." I laughed. She may have looked like a Girl Scout, but she talked more like a Marine. I like that. "I know I look like I'm only 12. I'll tell you what I tell every other detective I work with. Get over it. This is the best result I've gotten in my 5 months working for the NYPD, and I think it's something that could be useful." Persephone led me back to a computer in another room. She brought up a simple Facebook post that had a picture of Estella Abreu and the facts surrounding her death. Any cop will tell you that if you open up a tip line, you'll get a lot of tips. Many will be from well-meaning citizens who have no relation to your case. Some of the tips come from people bent on disrupting the police department. They are tips designed to waste time, and some tips just come from crackpots who believe every conspiracy theory that floats down the internet. The biggest thing I look for is someone willing to put their name to a tip. Anonymous tips are generally bullshit. Persephone didn't disappoint me. She pulled out a single sheet of paper with 2 photographs printed on it and some biographical info. I studied the upper photograph for a moment. "Is that Estella at a bar?" Persephone nodded. Almost 3 weeks before she was murdered. And the man to her left was her date. The photo wasn't the highest definition. I wouldn't have been able to positively identify the man in court, but I could tell he was young and looked athletic. He was wearing a nice suit and his hair was cut short. Persephone kept going. "The name in the text box is the man who gave us the tip. He's willing to talk to a detective, and I have his contact information." Today seemed to be the day for NYPD personnel to be at the top of their game. This was the second well-thought-out and well-presented lead I'd gotten from someone at one police plaza today. Persephone leveled a stare at me. "Now, you want to make any cracks about my age or experience?" "Persephone, I believe you just made it into my investigative plans on every case I ever get. Then can you do me a favor? Anything you want. Will you keep me in the loop? This is the most exciting this job has ever been. I was already looking on LinkedIn to see if there were any public relations jobs on Wall Street. Now I feel like I have to stay here to do my part." Spoken like the daughter of an Army vet. Your dad should be proud of you. Mom. Excuse me? My dad is a deadbeat living somewhere in Los Angeles. My mom was a medic in the Army. Your mom must be proud. Persephone beamed. She is. Chapter 28. I bolted from one police plaza again, already trying to reach the tipster by phone. I had called Walter Jackson, who did a quick profile for me. The tipster's name was Ivan Morodik. He had graduated from Boston University 6 years ago and now worked for one of the big trading houses on Wall Street. No criminal record, and no obvious reason to provide a fake tip. Even I had to admit, this looked pretty good. I called the cell phone but got no response. I didn't want to barge into his office if he was just a good citizen providing information. People get funny when cops show up at their work. It doesn't matter if they're a suspect or not. No one wants to answer questions from their boss about a visit from a homicide detective. About 20 minutes later, Ivan finally answered his phone and agreed to meet me at South Cove Park overlooking the Hudson. not far from where we'd found Estella Abreu's body a few days ago. The Hudson still had some wind chop, and the breeze whipped along the surface. Clouds floated across the afternoon sun. I was surprised how much it made the temperature dip. I wished I'd worn more than my North Face windbreaker. I saw a man standing alone at the seawall, looking at the screen of his iPhone. I approached him slowly. He was about 30, an average height, but he was dressed like a guy trying to impress people. A dark Brooks Brothers suit with a dusky red tie. A similar look to a lot of the people in finance. "Mr. Morotic?" He looked up from his phone, assessed me for a moment, then just nodded. If he was trying to show that he had little use for anyone who didn't work with him, he was doing a good job. Why would a guy like this take time from his work, which he probably thought was the only job that mattered? I went the whole official route. I pulled out my ID and badge and dispensed with any small talk I might have made to put him at ease. I held up the info sheet with the photo he'd sent us. Walter Jackson had also texted me the original electronic photo, which had better definition. "Tell me what made you post the tip," I asked. "Hell, I don't know. Just trying to do the right thing, I guess." "Where was the photo taken?" "We were at a big Wall Street party at an after-hours club by the Battery. Everyone from all the big financial houses was there. I saw this hot girl, and she was fumbling with a contact lens. I wear contacts, too, and had some re-wetting solution in my pocket, so I let her use it." "Did you know the man she was with?" "I've seen him around. I'm not sure who he works for. He might be an analyst for one of the smaller firms. He always seemed like a dick to me. Hair always perfect, always in a nice suit. Then I see him with this gorgeous girl, and it just sort of annoyed me that night." I said, "You've never talked to this guy?" "Never. And you have no personal relationship with him?" "If I've never spoken to him, how can I have a personal relationship with him?" I let the comment slide. Besides, it was accurate. I was just trying to get as much information as I could. I said, "You said the photo was from about 3 weeks ago. Is that correct?" "Not quite 3 weeks. Friday night will make it 3 weeks. Do you guys get together like that often?" "We usually do one big blowout in the fall and another in the spring. Plus, there are all the holiday parties, but the firms usually pay for those." I made notes about the bar and exact date. We'd have to see if the bar had security video and look through credit card receipts for the night. "You said you'd seen this guy around before. Can you recall where?" Morotic looked at me like I was a child asking him the same question over and over. Then Morotic said, "I've already told you. I just saw him at parties like this once in a while. Listen, I've got a lot to do. You got my cell phone number if you really need to reach me again." I had been dismissed. Chapter 29. Now I had a photo of a suspect and a rough time period he was with the victim. I racked my brain to figure out how to identify the man with Estella Abreu. I sent the photo to several different units at the NYPD, and Walter Jackson was running it past his contacts in all the federal agencies. Was the man Estella's boyfriend? How did she know him? The questions were rolling into my head. This was the first decent lead I'd had on this case. Actual physical evidence. It was frustrating to see what a potential suspect might look like, but not be able to put a name to the photo. I took the extra step of calling Ronald Higdon Esquire. He answered the phone talking. Before he said hello or anything else, all I heard was, "I'm working on finding out about the dead girls, Bennett. I've got guys all over the city asking questions." "That's good, because I'm going to need you to use the same network to ID a man in a photo. I'm going to send it to your phone in a few minutes. He's standing next to the beautiful girl. He's in a dark suit and has short light brown hair. I think he works on Wall Street somewhere." Ronald said, "I've got good connects on Wall Street, back from my days when I used to make deliveries down there." No great surprise, but it showed how much Ronald trusted me to casually admit he used to deliver cocaine to people on Wall Street. Everyone knew the industry was a major consumer of cocaine as well as amphetamines. Financial people's personalities seemed to push them toward drugs that made them more hyper than they already were. My next plan involved looking through the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority, or FINRA, files of every man registered in New York as a trader. But there were thousands and thousands of those. And if the picture on the respective man's driver's license or employee ID was even a year or two old, he might look quite different from the man in the bar photo. I thought about Persephone Garland in the public outreach section. Maybe she could work some more magic. Problem was, if we put out the suspect's photo, he'd be just as likely to see it as anyone. He could flee. He could change his appearance. He could figure a way to cover his tracks and develop alibis. I dismissed the idea. When I finally found this guy, I wanted to be able to surprise him. Instead, I sent the photo to 4 other informants. None of them nearly as good as Ronald Higdon Esquire. But one of them operated in Lower Manhattan and had been a trader himself until addiction knocked him all the way to the street. Now, he was a financial advisor to people who couldn't afford one of the big firms. And he made extra cash by helping law enforcement with information. I'd covered my bases, and I still had time to make it the holy name and teach some middle school girls how to throw elbows and not be seen by the refs. Or at least understand others would be trying to do the same to them. Chapter 30. There is always something comforting about walking the grounds of Holy Name. Maybe because I essentially grew up on the campus, or perhaps it's the artistry of the architecture. I always breathe a little easier when I'm here. I felt like I had wheels in motion on my investigation. I had informants trying to identify the man in the photo with Estella Abreu. I had Walter Jackson skimming through trader licenses, and Terry Hernandez was discreetly visiting some of the financial houses where she had contacts. I was trying to make sure my kids had well-rounded childhoods so I could produce good citizens. At least that's how I justified taking an hour out of my day to go over to my kids' school on the Upper West Side and work on basic basketball skills. The girls were already lined up when I arrived. I saw that Fiona had taken charge during my 3-minute absence. She was adjusting some of the other girls' stances for shooting free throws, and she was right on the money. It was a good thing I had backup on the court. I may have been able to block the investigation out of my mind for a few minutes to spend some quality time with Fiona. But seeing Trent, Eddie, and Ricky all sitting at the end of the bleachers waiting for a turn to play on the court broke my heart. The bullies had accomplished just what they wanted. They had scared us. That's what bullies do. I cut practice a little short. We played a quick scrimmage with the first team to 11 points declared the winner. Fiona scored the first 7 and the last 2 points for her team, bringing home a victory of 11-4. Then I had them practice 3-pointers. It was a simple drill. You pass once and then shoot from wherever you are on the 3-point line. When each of them made a basket, they could get cleaned up. After a few minutes, we adjusted it to lining up to shoot free throws instead of 3-pointers. I needed to be back at work today. Then I walked past my boys and told them to follow me. On our way out of the gym, I told Sister Elizabeth I'd be back with the boys in about 10 minutes. We walked out the front gate of Holy Name, then up the street toward the park where the boys had seen some trouble. Trent was worried. "Are you sure this is a good idea, Dad?" "No, son, I'm not. But I don't like to see your freedom restricted, and that's what these bullies are trying to do." Ricky seemed ready to rumble. "With you on our side, Dad, we can settle this once and for all." I looked at my son. "We're not members of the Crips. This is not a showdown. I just want to see if I can reason with the boys. Very simple." Then I looked at Eddie. "Is this about the time you usually see them?" Eddie shrugged. "Usually a little later. It's been on afternoons when we have a free period at the end of the day." When we arrived at the park, I realized we should have brought a basketball to blend in. There were a few kids in the park already. I said to the boys, "Do you see them?" Trent pointed to 2 boys at the far corner of the small park. "That might be them." I couldn't get a good look from this distance. They were clearly older teenagers. I could see how they could intimidate the boys. I felt my face flush and my blood pressure rise. The idea of someone tormenting my kids was something I just couldn't live with. I was still dressed in my blue Holy Name basketball coach's shirt. I had no ID. My comment to Brian came back to me. What could I do as an adult dealing with an aggressive adolescent? The answer was not much. The boys Trent had pointed out were now walking our way. My sons turned to face the approaching teenagers. I liked how they acted as a team. Ricky was in the middle, with Eddie and Trent flanking. I stepped closer to the boys to stop anything from escalating. But my anxiety was high. I was just trying to straighten out a situation that might be better off left to the juvenile unit detectives, or maybe social workers, or teachers, or their parents. I had fallen into the classic trap of thinking other people's kids would listen to me. They wouldn't. Now we were all in a worse situation as the boys kept walking directly toward us. Then Trent relaxed and said, "I was wrong. That's not them." We looked around for another few minutes, then all walked back to Holy Name. It gave me a little insight into the anguish the boys felt being prey to a bully. Anxiety and fear can definitely color your judgment. Chapter 31. After a decent night's sleep, I woke up alert and ready to find the suspect in the Estella Abreu case. I had a little extra time this morning, so I grabbed our extra-long Ford passenger van and chauffeured the kids to school a few blocks away. The remarkable thing was that we made it to the school 10 minutes before the final bell, a new record. The kids cheered inside the van. I looked up with a big goofy grin on my face to see my lifelong nemesis, Sister Sheila, the school principal. When I had started at Holy Name, it was also Sheila's first year. Now she stared directly at me. I didn't falter. I looked her right in the eye. That's what I was told to do if I ever had to face a dangerous animal one-on-one. Sister Sheila made a show of looking at her wrist. Then she gave me a big smile and a thumbs up. I didn't mind being acknowledged for doing something well. I think her thumbs up was more an indictment of how often I got the kids to school late. None of it really mattered. I knew she loved me, and I could tell she loved my kids. I never want to lose sight of what's important. The NYPD will function without me. Homicides will be solved without me. But time with my family is precious. My little adventure with the kids had put me in an exceptionally good mood. I switched from the van to my city-issued Chevy Impala in a matter of seconds. Before I even reached the garage's exit onto West End Avenue, my phone started to ring. I pulled over and answered the call. It was Ronald Higdon, Esquire. The first words out of his mouth were, "I got a name to go with your photo. I'm working on getting more stuff. I'll be at your shop in 10 minutes. I walked through the front door of Higdon's Pawn and Jewelry about 9 minutes later. As the door shut behind me, I said, "I hope you're not wasting my time." A grinning Ronald Higdon, Esquire, met me at the counter and slapped a sheet of paper on the glass. I picked it up and studied it for a moment. It was a registration form from FINRA's Central Depository for an investment advisor. It had a FINRA logo at the top. A copy of what looked like an employee ID photo was attached, and the man looked a lot like the man who'd been standing next to Estella Abreu. His name was Kyle Banning. I read some of his identifying features. He was 26 years old and lived on the Upper East Side on 5th Avenue, a couple of blocks from the Guggenheim. How the hell does a 26-year-old, even one in finance, earn enough to live in an apartment with a direct view of Central Park? I looked at Ronald. "How'd you find this so fast?" "One of my people in Lower Manhattan is hooked into all the financial houses. He recognized several of the people in your photo as being from one particular firm. He took a chance that your suspect was with that group. It worked out. This is really good work, Ronald. What's it going to cost me? Get that detective from the 1st Precinct, Richard Matthews, off my back. He called me again yesterday, just after you gave me the photo. He says I'm in deep shit for pretending to be a lawyer. Sounds like a big guy. I don't know why he's hassling me. Do you know him?" I nodded. "I've met him over the years. He is kind of big. Your assessment just from his voice is accurate. His deep voice makes him sound deadly serious." "What did you say to him?" What I always tell the cops. I didn't do nothing. Why are you hassling me? He didn't say much else. It's like he's too lazy to come up here and arrest me. So we'll be square if I can keep this Detective Matthews at the 1st Precinct from bothering you? Ronald made a show of wiping his hands together and holding them up. We'll be even, Stephen. Seriously, Bennett, I'd appreciate that kind of support. I just nodded and headed out the door. As I walked to my car, I pulled out my cell phone and called the 1st Precinct. More specifically, I called the cell phone assigned to Detective Richard Matthews. He answered with his usual gruff baritone voice. Detective Matthews. Rich, it's Mike Bennett. Thanks for scaring my informant. He bought the whole thing. A deep chuckle came across the phone line. I love the help when all I have to do is call a snitch and scare him a little bit. Is he doing everything you need him to? With a good attitude. Matthews laughed again. Feel free to use me any time you want. I was still smiling when I got to my car. I love having friends all over the department. I wish I could say I felt bad deceiving Ronald Higdon, Esquire, about the NYPD investigating him. I didn't feel much remorse. And now, I had a lead on a real suspect. Chapter 32. With the name Ronald Higdon, Esquire, gave me in hand, I didn't want to wait 1 second without acting on the information. I was barely even settled in my car before I called Walter Jackson, asking him to find out everything he could about Kyle Banning. I knew it wouldn't take the criminal intelligence analyst very long before he called me back with some juicy info. I texted Harry Grissom, but all I got back was, in a meeting at 1 pp. I sat in the car for a few minutes, making notes, and a couple of phone calls. I called the Abreu house and spoke to Mrs. Abreu about whether she had ever heard the name Kyle Banning. Mrs. Abreu said she had talked to all of Estella's cousins and friends. She'd even made notes. But Kyle Banning was not a name mentioned by any of the younger members of the Abreu family. I knew the grieving mother just wanted to talk and feel like she was contributing to the investigation. It happens all the time. Just like when making death notifications, you never cut off a family member when they want to talk about the victim. This was one of the few times I felt antsy. I was ready to roll with this new suspect. But I let Mrs. Abreu release all her pent-up emotion and told her I'd talk to her again later in the week. As soon as I hung up, Walter called me. The big man's rumbling voice tested the limits of my iPhone speaker. He said, "Sorry I didn't call you back quicker. I was having trouble with my reverse origami class. I'll let you know how things unfold." He couldn't help laughing at his own pun. Ugh. "You owe your daughter another $1 in the pun jar," I said. "What do you got for me?" Walter jumped right into the meat of his information. "Your suspect, Kyle Banning, has 1 arrest from January of this year. Guess what it was for? Some kind of violence against women? The universal indicator of a creep." All I managed to say was, "Go on." "A patrol officer near Times Square heard a woman cry out just after midnight. The officer located the woman, who was with Kyle Banning. The woman was crying and had a red mark on her face. The cop believed Banning had struck her, so he was arrested but later released without bail. Investigators tried to talk to the woman, but she left a message on the detective's phone that she wasn't interested in pursuing charges. The case was dismissed." The cynical side of me came out. "Let me guess. Banning comes from a wealthy family. His father is general counsel for one of the big insurance companies. Kyle still lives with his parents." I wrote a few more notes. Walter gave me the address of the financial company where Kyle Banning worked and phone numbers that were connected to him. Walter added, "There's one thing I noticed. It looks like someone tried to remove the reports from ECMS. I didn't know that was even possible. It can be. Like when someone has their record expunged, or if a judge orders us to remove a report. In this case, It looks like whoever tried it didn't have official permission and wasn't able to remove the case file. There are only 3 reports: the arresting officer's report, the investigating detective's report, and the report by the detective closing the case after the victim refused to talk. This concerned me. Sounds like Kyle Banning's got someone inside the department. More likely his dad has someone inside the mayor's office. I snapped my fingers as I saw the truth of what Walter Jackson was saying. My best choice was to jump on this lead fast and play everything close to the vest. Chapter 33. Walter Jackson could fit together information better than any computer. His profiles always prepared me for interviews on sensitive subjects. The victim in the case of Kyle Banning's arrest was named Celia Cartwright. She lived in Newark. I groaned. It could take me an hour or more just to get there. Thankfully, Walter next dropped that she worked at the American Museum of Natural History right here in the city. When I asked him what her job was at the museum, Walter said, "The wage and hour report only tells me who pays her, not what she does." Fair enough. It didn't take me long to get to the impressive American Museum of Natural History on the western edge of Central Park. My kids had little interest in the museum until they watched the movie Night at the Museum with Ben Stiller. Now the place was a great family outing. I went through the museum's main entrance. I badged an uninterested guard and asked if I could speak to the head of security. I smiled when the tall form of Steve Barberini strolled toward me. The former lieutenant had retired from the NYPD to become head security here at the museum. Barberini raised both hands and said, "Homicide? I swear I haven't murdered anyone." As we shook hands, I said, "You're too lazy to murder anyone, Steve, unless you shouted at them long enough that they just died." The director of security laughed and patted me on the back. "Good to see you, Mike. I got no one to talk to around this place, and not all that much to do most of the time." I gave him the name of the woman I needed to talk to and a brief rundown of why I wanted to talk to her. Steve understood. He made a quick phone call, then told me, "Celia Cartwright works on the 2nd subfloor in entomology." "She works on the origins of words?" He shook his head in disdain. "No, you idiot. That's etymology. She studies insects." After what seemed like a miles-long trek following Steve Barberini down 2 floors through endless hallways, he led me to a sub-level office lab without windows, but with nice soft light. A very pretty young woman with dark hair looked up from a magnifying glass. She said, "May I help you?" It was Celia Cartwright. Once Steve Barberini made sure she was comfortable talking to me, he left us alone. I tried not to look at what she was working on currently, which appeared to be maggots swarming over some kind of rotted flesh. She noticed my discomfort and placed a rag over the dish of maggots. I smiled and said, "How did you get into this line of work?" "I've always been fascinated by insects. Did you know they make up over 2/3 of the life forms on Earth? They can work together on projects far beyond the scale of anything humans have ever built. And even these simple maggots digest waste matter and turn it into useful material, like fertilizer or feed for other animals, without us ever appreciating them." Celia explained that she was on a fellowship and paid a small stipend. "That's why I live in Newark." She saw me wince at the name of the New Jersey city. She smiled. "I always get that reaction from New Yorkers, but I could never afford to live on my own in the city on what they pay me here. Anyway, I'm sure you're not here to talk about my salary." "You are correct. I appreciate you getting to the point. I'm here to ask you a few questions about what happened to you in January." "Why? No charges were ever even filed." She seemed upset but continued. "Using my deductive reasoning from watching Law and Order, I'm guessing Kyle's assaulted someone else and you're trying to figure it out." "Impressive. You've expressed exactly why I'm here and what I'm interested in. Maybe I should start watching more TV." Then she started to cry. Chapter 34. I sat silently while Celia Cartwright sniffled, then blew her nose. When she looked up, her brown eyes had red rims around them. She managed to say, "I'm sorry. I don't know why I reacted like that." "You're allowed to react any way you want. You were the victim of a crime, and nothing was done about it. That's a crime in itself." She reached over and patted my arm like she appreciated my comments, even if they didn't make her feel better. I heard a quiet, "Thank you." After a moment, she added, "I take responsibility for my part in not filing charges." It is rare for a cop to hear anyone take responsibility. Everyone has an excuse for all kinds of stupid behavior. This was refreshing. I gave it another minute, and she started to talk without prompting. Celia started slowly. "I met Kyle at a party in the financial district. I was there with one of my roommates. He invited me on a date, and a couple of weeks later, right after New Year's, I met him in Times Square. We ate from sidewalk vendors, had drinks at a couple of different Irish pubs, just had a nice evening. He was charming and so good-looking." Celia paused, gathering her composure and fighting off more emotion. I didn't say anything. I just waited. She swallowed hard and ran a finger under her eyes. When I told him I had to catch my train back to Newark, he suggested we stay at a hotel. We were standing in front of the St. James. That's when everything changed. I told him I had to get home, but he kept insisting we go into the Hotel St. James. He grabbed me by the arm. That's when I jerked it away from him. Then he slapped me in the face with his other hand. I had never been hit in my whole life, not even as a kid. What a shock. If that policeman hadn't stepped around the corner and taken control so quickly, God knows what would have happened. Kyle's whole face transformed. It was like a horror movie. I was terrified. Now Celia looked more determined than scared. She said, "My mistake happened the next day when a lawyer came to my apartment in Newark. He offered me money not to move forward with the case. I declined. Then he upped his offer to $20,000. You have to understand, I have huge student loans. Working places like this isn't going to help me much, but $20,000 would." I agreed, then avoided the detective when he came to my building to interview me. I left a message on the detective's phone that I didn't want to pursue any charges. I wouldn't even tell him in a phone call. I left a message. How cowardly is that? I've had nightmares about it ever since. I made a mistake. Everyone makes mistakes. You explained your reasoning quite well. I was trying to solve the mystery of why no charges were filed, and now you did that for me. There's nothing you did or said that was wrong. You don't need to feel bad or guilty about one thing. Will I get in trouble for accepting the money? No. Will I have to testify against Kyle for paying me off? I wouldn't want to put you in that position. I just needed to know the details. We spoke for a few more minutes. I was impressed with her poise and intelligence. As she spoke, she reminded me of how Estella Abreu's family spoke about her. Smart, articulate, beautiful. My biggest conclusion from talking with Celia Cartwright was that Kyle Banning's family must have some serious cash. Paying someone $20,000 not to file a misdemeanor battery seemed like overkill. My other takeaway was that if Kyle Banning thought he could get away with anything, there was no telling what he would try to get away with. Chapter 35. I have over the years been accused of rushing leads I like. I prefer to think of it as being efficient and not wasting time. I pride myself on being fair and impartial in my investigations. That doesn't mean I can't feel sorrow for the loss suffered by a family. It doesn't mean I don't feel anger at the way senseless violence can shatter families. I needed to keep an open mind on this homicide. Just because I had a suspect fall into my lap for one victim, Estella Abreu, didn't mean he was good for her death, or that of Suzanne Morton or Emma Schrade. There was still a lot of information to gather and evidence to evaluate. That's why it was tough to justify calling Terry Hernandez, to see if she'd join me in a surveillance of Kyle Banning. This was a delicate situation. If I was too obvious, Banning could try to hide any evidence and come up with alibis. The family would no doubt hire big-time criminal defense attorneys who would tie up every element in court before we found out any information at all. Terry answered on the first ring. I used a cheerful voice to say, "How would you feel about doing some surveillance this afternoon and this evening on a suspect?" "A suspect in our case?" "Of course a suspect in our case." I explained to her everything I had learned so far about Banning. "You just assumed I didn't have a date or anything going on tonight?" "I'm sorry. Do you have plans?" "No. But it would be nice if you assumed that I did." I said, "Really, I can find someone else." "Not unless you want your face to look like a Picasso painting." An hour later, Terry met me in Lower Manhattan. She got right to the point.